the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is the Afternoon Empire. Yes, good afternoon. It's 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Welcome to the home of free speech, the home of common sense. We've got a very busy few hours ahead of us on a pretty sunny Friday afternoon as we ease into a bit of a bank holiday situation. Coming up this afternoon, US Vice President J.D. Vance has slammed Britain's free speech laws. He's citing Lucy Connolly's jail sentence and the high number of arrests over online posts as critics call for outdated hate crime laws to be scrapped. He's right, it is a mess. But is it deliberate? And how do we save free speech? If you can answer me that, our lines are open. This, of course, comes as Labour MP Mary Glindon becomes the first in her party to call for the release of Lucy Connolly, saying her sentence was unduly harsh and she poses no threat to the public. People in this capacity should just simply not be in jail, of whatever political persuasion, whatever background. That ain't the place. Prison is not the answer. And Donald Trump has attacked Keir Starmer's net zero drive, urging the UK to abandon renewables in favour of more North Sea oil drilling and return to some good old fossil fuels. So says the Trump Meister. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. I feel really strongly about this. I don't think we can let this one go about freedom of speech. There's so much in this. It is so pivotal. If anyone, when you try to talk to them about freedom of speech, sort of glazes over and says, no, I'm not interested. But this is absolutely central to everything we stand for as individuals, but perhaps more poignantly as a country, as a nation, the backbone, the DNA, everything we stand for, everything we fought for. Freedom of speech. It might surprise you to know, though, that I don't think we're in a terminal position. Now, that might surprise you because the last few days I've spent hours and hours wanging on about the horrors of individuals having their homes raided, getting arrested, and even being sent to jail for something they might have said on social media. All of that still stands, but the question seems to be whether there is a wholesale attempt from government and law enforcement to shut down voices that are, to be generous, unhelpful, or to be more brutal, a threat to someone's idea of a decent world. What are we dealing with here? What I think is happening here is that we're in the middle of a weird period where no one quite knows what to do. As a result, no one is doing anything. The case of Lucy Connolly is clearly the most obvious example of where everything has gone wrong here. She, of course, was jailed under laws that very much predate anything you would put on Twitter or anywhere else for that matter by decades. Section 19 of the 86 Public Order Act, if you're interested. So that's how she was. All right, there is a problem. What Connolly did was the equivalent of, as was said today, and we'll speak to the author of the piece in the Telegraph shortly, was the equivalent of mouthing off in a pub, getting animated with a group of friends and articulating her anger in a slightly wonky or even an offensive fashion. So what? But of course, she didn't say it in a pub. And this is the line. This is the problem. She published it. She wouldn't have thought of it in those terms. She published it globally, unbeknown to her and probably millions of others. And lots of people do this as we speak. They will be doing it. Not really published it in the same way that Penguin would publish a book or the Daily Telegraph would publish an article. She found herself under the same legal requirements as newspapers and authors. The original laws of inciting racial hatred, of course, were meant to be aimed at global publishing empires, even political parties, not someone who's mouthing off in the Rose and Crown. That wasn't how it was meant to be. But that's where we've clearly ended up. And that's the bit that has to change. Now, I'm not sensing there is any politician out there who cares or can be bothered to fully address this. Social media is the pub. It's not Newsnight. It's not the Daily Telegraph. It's not HarperCollins. It's the pub. It's the tickled trout, the king's head. That's in this capacity. Of course, there's lots of other areas that use social media. In terms of people just simply using it to shout off, that's how it's been. Do you remember when it all started with the old chat rooms back in the day? It was known as the Wild West. People were attracted to those chat rooms for that very reason. You could say whatever you liked and nobody really cared. Nobody considered anything beyond that. It was said and then it disappeared. There wasn't even really a trace of it back then. I'm sure somebody could have retrieved the history if they'd really wanted to. So we have a curious situation where Bob in Arbroath is subject to the same rules as an international media conglomerate publishing newspapers or articles or books, publications in whatever capacity. And that's the bit where I think it's gone wrong. When J.D. Vance says we don't have freedom of speech, he means we don't have a First Amendment. As a result, we've ended up in this rather sinister legal void. We know that around about 32 people every single day are being arrested for things they said on Twitter or Facebook or wherever else. And then, of course, you've got other issues around hate speech. How often have we talked about the non-crime hate crimes, where you've got somewhere like 15,000 people a year that are logged in that respect? For non-crime hate crime. I mean, the first two words, half an hour ago, if you put that in a dissertation, you'd have been kicked out for lousy language. Well, if it's non-crime, it can't be a hate crime, right? Non-crime, hate crime, non-crime, hate incident. Now, Emma Duncan is the journalist that wrote the piece I'm referring to in the Telegraph today when she said the right tends to blame state-sponsored wokery for eroding freedom of speech. She says that's a misreading of what is going on. The criminal justice system does not have a left-wing bias, but it does have a bias against people who do or say offensive things, could be racist, could be Islamophobic, because it's its job to keep order. And they may cause disorder. Keeping order is increasingly hard because globalisation leads to the clash of cultures on and offline. As the tensions between the need to keep order and the protection of free speech grow, the latter is losing out. She's absolutely bang on. We'll be speaking to her in just a bit on this one. So how do we save freedom of speech? It's very convenient. You know, Starmer is a bit of a gift that keeps on giving at the moment, a bit of a go-to man, you know, two-tier Keir and all the rest of it. All of this stuff was going on way before Keir Starmer even walked up Downing Street, let alone got through the door. I know we now project it onto him, and let's be honest, he's the Prime Minister. Do something about it, Keir. But there is a very real sense that much of this stuff is deliberate, comes from above. There's some sneaky words go down the food chain, telling the cops on the ground, break his door down. He said something on WhatsApp. It doesn't really work like that, but it does work because of a void of confusion. What are we meant to do? Someone's put in a complaint. They've said there's something racist here. As it stands, that racist comment is subjected to issues around incitement. And the law, formed back in the 1980s, still stands. But it should never apply in this area. We should never be sending people to jail for stuff they wrote on social media, for goodness sake. Help us out on this one. I feel so strongly about of all the issues that we talk about of late. This is absolutely crucial, and it's still a big grey area. I think we need to know. We need clarity. We need a recalibration, if you like, of how social media in particular, it's not just social media, in particular, where that sits, where that fits in a new age, if you like. 0344 499 1000. How do we save freedom of speech? Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Henry Hill back with us, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home. And Henry, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Nice to have you with us as ever. Let's start with those claims by J.D. Vance that Britain has a free speech problem. And it may hold weight as growing cases suggest the balance between expression and societal harmony is being mishandled. So let's have a listen, worth a reminder of that moment when J.D. Vance and Keir Starmer discussed the issue. Here it is.
Look, I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
Very proud of our history. It doesn't always work, or it doesn't always look like that, Henry, that's for sure.
No, of course, anyone in America is going to say Britain has a free speech problem because America has the First Amendment.
Yeah.
It has incredibly rigorous free speech protections, which this country doesn't have. Right, that's the baseline level of it. And what's happened really is we've reached the point where free speech is something that nobody can really say they're not in favour of. And so everyone says they're in favour of freedom of speech. But actually, if you consider freedom of speech as the ability to, as you say, speak offensively, actually, this country doesn't really have it, or at least it has some quite serious restrictions on it. Now, lots of people do actually support those restrictions. I think the tension comes because no one wants to admit they're anti-freedom of speech. And so we end up with these specious efforts to say, actually, no, this is freedom of speech. You know,
Yeah.
the overused shouting fire in a crowded theatre line that very sensible in that particular context, but that is then applied to police all manner of speech. It's interesting you mentioned the 1986 Public Order Act, which is really at the root of a lot of these problems. We had an excellent piece on Conhome from a man called Michael Reyners a few months ago, which your viewers might be interested in. Because do you know how that act works? The act says that the police can take action if someone might hypothetically have been offended by the speech, which means that if I say something offensive, if you say something offensive, you were talking about being down the pub. It doesn't actually matter if somebody overheard it and was offended.
Yeah.
The police can essentially invent someone who they think was offended and arrest you on that basis.
And you sort of wonder at what point in the room, when they were cobbling together this law, at what point did somebody first suggest it? Did no one else in the room say, that sounds all shades of odd?
Well, this law was passed in 1986.
Yeah.
Right? A very, very different place, very different country. We didn't have the internet, for starters, but also our conception of what was, for example, offensive speech and what offensive speech should be policed was very different. I mean, if you think about some of the sitcoms that were made in the 1970s, some of which were deemed to be progressive at the time. So they're in a very different place. And actually, one of the biggest problems that often arises in government and lawmaking is that people don't account for how a law could be used by people who don't share a lot of their unwritten assumptions.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think you and I can maybe agree that if you're a police officer in 1987 and the Thatcher government has passed this law, which basically is for allowing you to arrest, far-right National Front members, Nazis, saying things that you don't need to have a Jew or a black person for them to be physically attacking for that to be justified. They didn't think what on earth would happen, one, if the internet allowed the simultaneous global publication by anyone from their living room, and two, how public attitudes would shift.
Yeah, that's also true. So it is worth just giving it some context there. This law came in under Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the interesting thing about it. That was not anyone's idea of a left-wing government. But the Conservatives at the time, they were taking a hard stand. I think some people forget that in the 1970s, the National Front was potentially looking like it might become a serious, if sort of marginal force in British politics. And Margaret Thatcher absolutely stamped that out. And the Conservatives ran that famous poster at one point, of a black man, and it said, Labour says he's black, Tories say he's British. So this was a real live concern at the time. I think it's one of the great ironies I always find when I read about people saying, oh, the Gen Z or whatever thinks that the UK is more racist. The number of people who think that the UK is racist is going up year on year. And I'm just like, well, even I can remember things being worse, much worse than now.
100%.
Right. It's remarkable. Just as I say, go back and watch media from the 70s and 80s. The sheer extent to which genuine racism was normalized. But now, these laws don't get repealed. They don't get checked up on. Nobody says, do we still need this? That's another problem. There's a wonderful legislative thing called a sunset clause, which is where you pass a law and then after a fixed period of time, the law ends. And I think that's wonderful because it means you can pass a law to solve the problem. And then after a certain period of time, you at least need to check whether or not you still need it.
Well,
absolutely.
absolutely.
So that's not how we legislate.
And it's interesting that given, as you rightly say, almost 40 years have passed since that law came in. Nobody would have anticipated the kind of areas that it would be covering. Nobody had heard of social media, hardly ever heard of something called the internet. It was loosely around in a very parochial sort of military context, I think. But broadly speaking, I can't imagine that the people that came before us would, the Thatcherites, if you like, would have been happy that it would be applying in these kind of areas. But who knows? And I do honestly think as well, just an additional and a final point to this, Henry, people tend to get angry about freedom of speech issues, not because of the fact that somebody had or doesn't have the right to say it, but it's usually what they say and whether they agree with it rather than the fundamentals of free speech itself. But we'll come back to that shortly. We've got lots of guests coming in on this one. We're asking the question, how do we save freedom of speech? 0344 499 1000. We'd be failing on this, Henry, if we didn't mention the Chagos Islands. Of course, Sir Keir Starmer's deal to return the islands to Mauritius could actually cost over 30 billion, which far exceeds, of course, the 3.4 billion initially claimed due to inflation and development funding. Let's have a listen to James Cleverly. This is Mr. Cleverly speaking to us on the show yesterday.
Well, they keep saying, oh, no, those are not on the table. But the point is they have now demonstrated to the world in this negotiation, as in so many others, that under any kind of pressure, they roll over. This is a really, really negative signal they're sending to the world. Just as we're seeing with their U-turn on winter fuel allowance, because their backbenchers got a little bit shirty, Keir Starmer and the Labour government do not have the resolve to act in the national best interest. All our adversaries, competitors around the world can sense that, and it's going to make maintaining Britain's interests around the world a whole load harder because the whole world has seen that Keir Starmer rolls over at the first sign of pressure.
Well, of course, as many people pointed out, Henry, it was Mr. Cleverly who began the negotiations on this. He says he would never have signed this off in its current form. We will never know, of course. But there it is. The money, the bill is, well, potentially even higher than we first thought.
Yeah, this is remarkable. When Britain signed up to the International Court of Justice, we explicitly excluded from its remit claims by former Commonwealth members, specifically so this wouldn't happen. It's also the case that the ICJ's rulings are only binding if both parties agree to arbitration, which Britain didn't. So there's no legal basis for this whatsoever. On James Cleverly, you're right. Ultimately, the instruction came from the Prime Minister. It was Boris Johnson who first looked at this, and then Liz Truss who instructed to negotiate. But he could have resigned, and he didn't. The bill is extraordinary. It would be, if it were a legitimate expense, because this is over 100 years, if it were a legitimate expense, it wouldn't be the end of the world, right? I think Sir Keir Starmer's work says that it averages out at about £100 million a year, which in the grand scheme of government spending, sadly, is not that much money. But the fact is that this is active self-harm. I've actually been struggling to write about it. I did this morning's editorial on it because there isn't a word. We use bought and sold. There's not actually a word for paying somebody lots of money to take something valuable off you when you don't need to. Humanity hasn't had to invent one. It's extraordinary. Mauritius, well, in your introduction, you said that returning the islands to Mauritius, the islands have never been Mauritian. Yeah. Right? Diego Garcia, the Chagos archipelago, is I think the most remote inhabited archipelago on Earth. To give you an idea of what that was like, in World War I, a German warship anchored there for a month and got refitted and had a very convivial time with the garrison because the garrison did not know that there was a war on because no one had got the message to them yet. It was lumped in with Mauritius during the colonial era because Mauritius was simply the nearest colony. And so it was an administrative headquarters, but it's hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So there's no actual anti-colonial claim here. The Mauritian government also persecutes the Chagosians. The actual native Chagosians, many of whom are in this country, are absolutely outraged by this deal because their rights are not respected by the government of Mauritius. Mauritius is also a Chinese ally. One of the most absurd, everything about this deal is absurd. One of the most absurd parts is the government's announced a maritime exclusion zone around the base of 24 nautical miles. Wow. Now, that might have been great in the age of sail right?
Yes.
Maybe even in World War II, right? Maybe it would have taken the Bismarck a little bit of time. Actually, although I think that guns weren't nearly as far. But you know how long it would take a missile launched from a Chinese submarine at 24 nautical miles to reach the base?
Probably half a second.
It's about 45 seconds.
Yep.
No time to respond. No time even for the base to respond. Previously, with the current exclusion zone, that if a Chinese ship was right on the border and decided to initiate an attack with a missile, it would take 22 minutes. It's
unbelievable.
No one knows why this is happening. That's the thing.
Indeed.
Yeah, go on.
Listen, Henry, no, stay with us, Henry. We've got to pause momentarily. Henry Hill, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home with us. We are going to be speaking back on that free speech issue. Emma Duncan, the columnist with us, Harry Miller as well. Matt Stadlen is going to join us as well to debate that issue of how do we save freedom of speech. Some argue it doesn't need saving. Our lines are open. This is Talk.
The extraordinary thing is it's even worse than that, Alex, because the reality is what they've also done is they've effectively conceded that these courts that were set up deliberately, very deliberately by our predecessors, people like Churchill and so on and Attlee, Labour and Conservative, they were set up in order to dispute between countries but not between Commonwealth countries. They've conceded that effectively that's exactly what the court can do. Now, do you think that it's going to stop in Mauritius? No, of course it's not. Of course it's not.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
5+1, Henry Hill is with us from Conservative Home. Let's move to this story then, Henry. Donald Trump criticising Keir Starmer's net zero policies, urging the UK to shift from renewables to a bit of good old-fashioned North Sea drilling. It's worth, on that very point, having a little reminder of those famous words on the day of President Trump's inauguration. Here it is.
Today I will also declare a national energy emergency. We will drill, baby, drill. We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate industry and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers.
There it is, that beautiful stuff right underneath us, Henry. It's gorgeous, it's stunning. Oh, it's the best. Drill, baby, drill. He loves it, loves a bit of oil, of course, over there the White House. But is he likely to convince Keir Starmer to reverse his policies on net zero? I don't think so somehow.
I don't think Donald Trump is going to be the one to do that. At some point, sheer fiscal reality might. If you look at the way that this government is endlessly having to grub around for money. Rachel Reeves receiving a memo from Angela Rayner the other day talking about 8 new exciting taxes they might have. Yeah. Ultimately, I think that net zero is a perfectly good principle. The baffling thing about it is that we're going about it in a completely insane way, because the obvious answer to net zero is nuclear. Yeah. Because if you have nuclear, it's reliable. You don't have to. It's clean. As long as you can store it, and you can have as much of it as you like. There's a really positive story that politicians could be saying about net zero, which is once you've got clean energy, it's guilt-free energy. We can generate as much of it as we like. We can make electricity much cheaper and have manufacturing. And instead, we're not really doing nuclear. We sort of are, but Ed Miliband is really big on renewables. And renewables are fine in some places. If you're Saudi Arabia, I'd probably cover half my country in solar panels and export it like I currently do oil and all the rest of it. But the big problem with renewables is that it's intermittent, most of it. Yep. Wind, solar. And that means that you have to have non-renewable energy backup for the extent for whatever percentage of your grid is renewable, which means that the expenses get really, really big. And the other thing, just quickly about North Sea oil that's really baffling is oil's used for plastic. Even if we stopped burning oil tomorrow, even if we completely managed to replace all of the fuel, plastic is going to become a bigger and bigger industry over the next 50 years, according to global industrial estimates. And we could be in that trade. And instead of taking it, I think at some point a futurist said the weirdest thing for people looking back in 200 years' time is that we took something as valuable as oil and we burned it. But instead of doing that, Ed Miliband is killing this industry off by banning new drilling for purely, and he says it, purely symbolic reasons. It sends a signal to the world. The world doesn't care. The world has its own problems. The world has its own energy needs. China and India are boasting about how many new coal power plants they open. And at the same time, this government is cutting the knees out from under our economy with sky-high energy costs. It's baffling.
It is baffling, and it's ideological, and I think that's perhaps what's most terrifying about this. And Miliband and his team seem completely immovable on almost any aspect of it. Don't mention the nuclear word around him. He will literally melt on the spot. And let's finally move to this story, a slightly lighter one. Doctor Who's wokest ever lead star, Nkuti Gatwa, is axed after just 2 series. Apparently it's gone a bit woke, and there's the problem. They've had all sorts of mad storylines over there at Doctor Who HQ, including non-binary aliens, a gay doctor, and Lord knows what else. Just an incredible list, a litany, if you like, of just taking something that ultimately was a sort of a teenager sci-fi thing and was a bit fun into an array of political statements, it seems.
You know, the really sad thing about this, I haven't watched Doctor Who for a while because I'm a 35-year-old man. Ultimately, I don't think that was an indictment of the show. But the thing about this is, I loved classic Doctor Who. You know, I got to go back and watch it. Some of that was really political, especially stuff in the 70s. There was one, The Sunmakers, where Tom Baker, the most lovable Doctor, threw an alien off a building at one point because it was an embodiment of some kind of evil capitalism. But you know what the difference was between that and this? Is that they told stories first, right? It was a perfectly good sci-fi story. You could pick up the political subtext, or you couldn't if you were 5 or 6 or 10 or however old you were when you were watching it. Well, the problem with this series is not necessarily that it had particular values. Most art does. It's that it was so didactic about it. It wanted you to know. It didn't want you to be in any doubt. The story was second to hammering you over the head with all this nonsense. And art like that never works because it isn't really art.
Yeah. Spot on, as ever. Henry, thank you. Henry Hill, Deputy Editor at Conservative Home, with us on the programme. The days of Doctor Who. I'm not going to ask who was your favourite Doctor. I am intrigued as to what point it went wrong. I know the defenders of Doctor Who go, well, no, actually, it's always been, and Henry alluded to it, there's always been some stuff in there. There was a real sense that it had taken it to, from a kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek to something where someone was trying to make very deliberate points. And who blames a writer or a director if they're given the job? They're going to throw in their pet areas of interest or poignancy as they see fit. and no one's going to question it over the sacred Doctor Who. Russell T Davies never going to be called in for a meeting to say your scripts are a bit wonky, mate, or a bit wokey even for that matter. 0344 499 1000. That is us. Our lines are open. The question of free speech. How do we save freedom of speech? Do you think what has been happening lately, and this is one of the views that, well, you know, you read a lot of hogwash on social media, but one of the things that comes through really regularly is that this is designed. This comes from the top. The curtailing of free speech, the knocking down doors, visiting people at home, jailing people for offensive tweets. All of this has come almost literally from number 10. This is Keir Starmer. Even though it all predates Keir Starmer, don't let that stand in the way. It's come from the very top, when in all likelihood it's come from frankly, a no longer fit for purpose 1986 law that is the problem. We'll have details on that. We've got a couple of guests coming on to chat to us. Over to you. How do we save freedom of speech? What is your observation as to where the problem is and who is responsible? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. 0344 499 1000. Nearly late. 25 to 2. Lots to talk about in this section. We'll go to your calls and comments as well. How do we save freedom of speech? Is it an issue that needs saving? Does it just need, I don't know, recalibrating? I think that probably puts it best. Vice President J.D. Vance has criticised Britain's freedom of speech laws. He's done this quite a bit. Did it in front of Keir Starmer, of course, at the Oval Office, highlighting Lucy Connolly's 31-month jail sentence for a tweet. More than 30 people are arrested daily for online posts, with 13,200 non-crime hate incidents recorded in the last year. Critics say outdated laws like the 1986 Public Order Act fail to keep up with modern online communication and social media. And it comes as the first Labour MP, Mary Glindon, is the first in her party to break ranks and call the sentence for Connolly unduly harsh. In just a bit, we'll speak with Matt Stadlen, the broadcaster, along with Harry Miller, former cop and founder of Fair Cop. But first, Emma Duncan, who wrote that piece in The Times this morning. Emma, good afternoon to you. We can't quite hear you, Emma. I don't know whether you're muted or whether there is something in the system. We will try and... there you are, loud and clear. Fantastic.
Okay. Jolly good. Here I am.
Here you are indeed. Nice to have you with us. It's interesting. You wrote it. I felt I could have written that piece myself, well, not quite as well as you did, but in the sense that there's a lot of misinformation around so many stories these days. We can probably blame our friends social media for that. But what I sensed and what I certainly took from reading the piece that you wrote is that the position we're in with freedom of speech is not terminal, but we do need to debate and have a chat about it.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, when J.D. Vance made those, it felt like pretty rude comments about Britain, I thought, oh, come on. And then I did pay attention, and I just have noticed, a quite large number of stories where I think that's not reasonable, that's excessive. And obviously, the whole freedom of speech thing is very difficult in the sense that everybody accepts you can't have absolute freedom of speech. You can't go around shouting fire in crowded theatres. So there has to be some restraint on it, but that restraint must feel reasonable to reasonable people. And I think we're getting a bit out of kilter on this one. And I don't want to shout. Boris Johnson was saying we live in a police state. I don't think we're in an extreme position, but I think we're in a position where we need to be careful about the direction of travel.
And that's it, isn't it? It is the direction of travel. And you talk about the fact that, it is the state, for want of a better term, the criminal justice system. It is their job, of course, to keep order. And when they sense or sniff that something is not within the template of that point, they pounce. And they often pounce maybe because technically it does still come under that 1986 Act, even though that Act was written, curiously, under Margaret Thatcher, but it was written before anybody had ever heard about social media or anything like that. So it doesn't tend to fit. I made the point at the beginning, and you made it brilliantly in your piece, that things like the Connolly tweet was sort of the equivalence of somebody shouting in a pub. It's something I say almost daily on this programme. We never used to go around rounding up people in the Rose and Crown because they'd said something a little bit off. But that's where we are today because it's published. And those that sit there, Lucy Connolly never thought for 1 second when she wrote that she was subjected to the same laws as the Times, the Sun, HarperCollins and the BBC.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the Public Order Act was written in the wake of the Brixton riots, and it was directed at people publishing newspapers, books, leaflets, at political parties. It wasn't directed at people who were kind of sounding off, and she knew she was sounding off. I mean, her tweet was absolutely appalling, and she should have been punished in some way for it. But I think an awful lot of people feel that 31 months in jail is too much for a tweet that you feel stupid about afterwards, that she took down after 3 hours or so. So I think there's a number of stories where, people like me, and I'm kind of a pretty centrist person, just think, hold on a minute. I mean, you've seen these stories about people who have had what they thought were private conversations on WhatsApp that are subjected to the old Communications Act, about online communication, which was not intended to be about private conversations. And it seems to me wrong when people, even if people say horrible things in private conversations, that they should be prosecuted for that.
But I do wonder, Emma, just a final point, whether the government, particularly this government, kind of quite like retaining the status quo. Anyone, I think, and Starmer should know this, he's a lawyer, for goodness sake. I reckon if it was a quiet night and you, me and Keir were sitting in the Rose and Crown, he'd agree with every single word we've just said. But he wouldn't say it out loud because it sort of suits the establishment to retain it in a way. It gives them a sense of being in control. It makes them, certainly from a left-wing perspective, makes them feel perhaps nice and warm and cuddly in their tummy to know that, people who've said hurty words are being dealt with. There's no real political appetite to address this, what clearly is an imbalance and could be in danger of becoming something more.
Well, I think that's right, but I don't think it's a left-wing, right-wing thing. I think it's a government thing. Governments, by and large, do not like to lose control because they know perfectly well that they're going to get much more flack if there's another lot of riots than they will for a bit more constraint on freedom of speech.
100%. Listen, Emma, on that point, it's been great to have you on. We will speak again. I hope Emma Duncan, who wrote that piece in the Times this morning. Let's get a word from Harry Miller, former cop and founder of Fair Cop. Also, Matt Stadlen, the broadcaster, both joining us. Afternoon to you both. I mean, there's a lot to say on this, guys. Let me just give you a flavour of what people are saying here. Nigel Brown says Sorry, this is from Linda. Another aspect of the loss of freedom of speech is funding. I run an art group in a small village in the Dales. Because we have no ethnic minority members, there are none in the area because we are all from local Christian church. And we have no outreach programme to other countries, and we use traditional Western themes and art techniques. Funding is refused by the lottery and the local council now. This applies to many groups. So basically, if you don't think as they think, you're not getting funding. And I only bring that into this, the point that Linda made, because it is another aspect of, you know, a curious set of rules we're living by. Let's return to JD Vance. Good to see you again, Matt. Long-time colleague of a few years ago, of course. We've bumped into each other since then. From what I can gather, looking at your work online, you're still unbelievably impenetrable and totally unreasonable most of the time. Can I just get that straight, that is still the case, Matt?
It is great to see you. I can't believe that A, you haven't had me on your show before.
True.
And B, that neither of us are wearing ties. I've copied your outfit that you used to wear religiously, and usually I'm in a tie. However, the reason I'm not in a tie is because I'm sitting in a car outside Trent Bridge cricket ground, and I've left the England-Zimbabwe test in order to come and talk to you. And this is an important point because I am speaking to you on a mobile phone on FaceTime, and yet I am also aware that I am speaking to you very publicly. And not only is this going out live on national radio, but it also could be clipped up and disseminated online. And therefore I have an enormous responsibility that comes with the privilege of this platform. And everybody who has the privilege of being able to use social media, which in many ways has been brilliant for democracy, giving everyone a voice, not just people like us who've had big platforms, one of the things that comes with that is responsibility, and you simply cannot go round posting on public platforms that for all you care they should burn down the asylum hotels. Now my view on that, and I've read the Court of Appeal judgment, which is worth everyone reading, it's 13 pages. In my gut, I feel the sentence is too harsh, and that's partly because of the way she phrased it. If, however, Lucy Connolly had intended, and if it could reasonably have been interpreted as literally a call to go and burn down asylum hotels, and indeed to take the government and politicians with them, then of course she should be in prison for 31 months, because that is incitement to murder. And free speech, as we've heard throughout, and I read Emma's piece, it's a very interesting piece, but free speech, we all know in this country, and not just this country, by the way, but in America as well, comes with important limitations.
Harry, you know from personal experience the difficulty of saying something and getting a knock on the door. Where do you think we're at in terms of free speech today? Have we learnt anything in the last sort of 5 years? Is it getting worse? Do you think there is a problem? Do you feel it comes from the top?
Yeah, there's definitely a problem. And I hear what's said about Twitter and this, etc. is a form of broadcast, but this is coming from a professional broadcaster, and I think there is a separate set of rules for professional broadcasters from those of us who simply go to Twitter as though we were at the pub or in a marketplace. I don't think that Lucy Connolly should have spent any time in jail. What she did, she sounded off following an atrocity in the same way that many of us would sound off over a meal down at the pub or what have you. She thought about it for a couple of hours, and as most of us do, think, you know what, that was a bit wrong, I shouldn't have said that, and she took it down. There is no evidence whatsoever that anybody was incited to do anything as a result of her tweet, none whatsoever. So, of course, at the very worst that should have happened is that the police maybe knock on her door and say, come on, let's not have any of this anymore because it's wrong. A lot of people have seen it. She would have said, you know what, I agree with you. You are absolutely right. In the future, I'll not do that. But I'm so damned angry about what happened. And that should have been the end of it. She's gone to prison. What is the purpose of prison? Well, prison has two purposes. The first one is to protect the public from the perpetrator. Does anybody seriously believe there is any threat whatsoever from Lucy Connolly? No. And the second one is to rehabilitate. Well, Lucy rehabilitated herself within 2 hours in a dog walk. She came back and took the tweet down. That should have been the end of it.
And just to expand that point, Matt, I mean, 30 people a day are arrested in this capacity, in this kind of way. I mean, is that not evidence that we are in a really particular problem when it comes to a threat to freedom of speech? If you're getting arrested because you had a pop at somebody in a governor's group or a parents' group on WhatsApp, or your tweet had been misinterpreted by Kent police, so they come round and arrest a former cop, a former colleague in that case. I mean, this is out of control. Free speech is being compromised here.
The idea that this is some sort of woke movement, or indeed a Labour Party, Labour government-inspired movement, is obviously nonsense. Don't forget, as you've already said quite rightly, that the statute under which Lucy Connolly was found guilty, was dating back from Margaret Thatcher's time, I think 1986. Perhaps. So that's not new. The question, and I think is a very interesting question, is whether the law should be updated in order to reflect, I think this is the thrust of Emma's piece in the Times, in order to reflect the changing ways in which we do business. We are now all given a voice. Personally speaking, I think WhatsApp should probably stand apart from Twitter or X and Facebook and so forth, because I see it as much more one-to-one, much less public. Certainly, if you don't intend it to be public, it doesn't need to be public. But when it comes to Twitter and public platforms like that, I'm sorry, but we have to adapt. As I say, with the privileges comes responsibility. And I just take everyone back to those riots last year. And I say again, I'm coming from a position where instinctively, and even having read the judgment, which is of course all about the law, I feel that that sentence was harsh. But if you go back to that time, and it's true the violence hadn't yet started when Lucy Connolly tweeted that, an asylum hotel had not yet been set on fire as it would be. But if you go back to that time, ethnic minority families, millions of families up and down the country, were living for about a week or more in terror. Children were scared to go outside. I was stuck in Scotland interviewing Liz Truss and other politicians. My family was down in London. I was deeply concerned for their safety. When you have a public crisis, a national crisis, such as riots, the government has to take a firm line. And in this case, it wasn't even the government, it was the courts, it was the judicial system that swung into action, as well as the Crown Prosecution Service, because we cannot live in a country where asylum hotels are set on fire and people, because of the colour of their skin or their culture or whatever it is, are attacked in the street. And part of sentencing, Ian, is deterrent. And you have to deter those sorts of ugly scenes which shamed our country from ever happening again.
Harry, is that a reasonable way to define how you see that era unfolded?
I think we're missing the point entirely. Nature abhors a vacuum, as we know. And the government, trying to enjoy its honeymoon period of being recently elected, was just utterly appalled that this had gone on. And they kept silent. And when people keep silent, then people start to talk, people start to speculate. And this is not just simply frivolous speculation. This is speculation based on past experience, past history, past knowledge. And when Keir Starmer came out and started blaming everything on the far right and started denying what all of us knew, that this was going to have something to do with immigration and something to do with Islam. And he told all those people who called it right that they were far right terrorists and were in danger of committing a crime by simply speculating. He abdicated responsibility. He allowed a social void to occur in which people rushed to...
Let me just interject, because I just want to widen it out a little bit. Final point then, Matt. Is free speech under threat in this country?
Well, first of all, as we all know, there's a judicial process, and you have to be very careful not to jeopardise a trial. There, of course, can be a conversation about what should and shouldn't be able to be talked about, what should and shouldn't be put out into the public domain, and there is a risk that people will speculate when there's a void. But the responsibility for the speculation, particularly if it is racist and if it is targeting entirely innocent people, as the speculation was, for example, entirely innocent men and women and children in asylum hotels, the responsibility for that is the people who do the inciting and the people who actually carry out the violence. As far as the wider question is concerned, are we under attack with our free speech? I don't think so. We know you are are the host of a talk radio show. You know that there are certain boundaries, but I think free speech is flourishing in this country, where we have your station, other stations springing up, and people are really able to get stuck in and share their views. And that's true on social media as well.
And Harry, 20 seconds if you can. Is free speech under threat?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been interviewed by the police 3 times now. Once for saying that once for saying that men can't become women. Once for saying that LGBT is not LGBTQ, etc. And once for defending a war veteran who posted a flag. So free speech is most definitely under threat. We live in a police state. It's as simple as that.
Harry, thank you. Matt, good to see you again. Thank you. Matt shaking his head there at that last comment. Matt Stadland, broadcaster. Harry Miller, former cop and founder of Fair Cop. Over to you, 0344 499 1000.
Not only are we giving them to Mauritius for mysterious reasons, we're saying, as well as giving them to you, would it be okay if we gave you 9 billion quid? We're doing that as well. The deal is absolutely mystifying, baffling. I have no idea what it's all about, apart from the only possible reason, as you say, David, is a kind of treacherous hatred of Britain and these old lefties trying to assuage their guilt about British colonialism. It's pathetic.
Across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
I don't know if this is from Marge or L, who says, I think your free speech comparison between the UK and the US is not really true. What you fail to note is Americans are very litigious, and thus one, especially financially solvent, would think twice before saying something that was not soundproof in fear of being sued for millions. You are better compensated if you take out a private lawsuit rather than using law enforcement, unlike us here in the UK, says L. Well, that's sort of true and sort of not, because, of course, you can have all sorts of rights on. If you look at American satire, Saturday Night Live, all the late shows can do all sorts of things in that area. In fact, you often get Americans come to the UK for a lawsuit because our libel laws will invariably throw up more favourably to their cause, whereas in America they'll say, well, it's just my First Amendment rights. So yes, there are bigger multi-million-pound-dollar lawsuits, but I think they sit in a more specific area. They certainly wouldn't be around areas such as what you write on Twitter. I mean, in the States, you can even give your views on what you think the result of a court case might be. The fun they had with the O.J. Simpson trial on Jay Leno's show. Or was it Letterman? One of the two. Letterman, I think. Simon's in Derby on this question of how we save freedom of speech. Does it need saving, Simon? Good afternoon.
Hi, Ian. Hope you're well.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Great. No, I was just saying to your researcher earlier on before I got on, I think sometimes we confuse things between, like you and I probably say something down the pub and you wouldn't, like you just said, and you wouldn't think twice about it possibly. But as they say, the pen is mightier than the sword, and that's the problem. You start printing stuff, putting it into the public domain as a sort of almost a physical thing, it suddenly takes on a different concept.
It's true, isn't it? When you read something, it's a bit like, when friends momentarily fall out over a text conversation because there's no tone, right? Somebody says something and you think, why did they say that? And they didn't mean it like that. It's just the way it came out in its isolated form in the written word is very different from the spoken one.
Exactly, and that's why the pub sort of analogy.
It's not quite the same thing. No. Yes, no, I do agree. It isn't quite the same thing, but of course we could also argue that it's not quite the same thing as a political party saying something, or a big institution print, or the newspaper of the day saying it.
Yeah, I think the other thing nobody's mentioned, or I haven't heard it mentioned, is was anybody prosecuted for retweeting this? Because I bet somebody did retweet it.
I would imagine a lot of people would have. That's a very good point.
And if not, why not? They're just as guilty as the person.
That's a great point, because you can be done for repeating a libel.
Yeah, you can.
I mean, if I read something in a newspaper out loud on the radio that's libelous, then I'm just as guilty as the person that wrote it in the newspaper.
Yeah, she may have been the perpetrator, but all the other people were just as guilty by association.
That's a great point. Love it. Listen, you're giving us some great points for thought there. Simon, thank you very much indeed. I want to get a word from Matthew in Newport. Matthew, what are you thinking? We've not got long, but I'm sure you can do it. Good afternoon.
I'll try and make it quick, and the irony is the last chap was a Matt, and he said many things I was going to say. So
it's a Matt thing, right?
Yes, it's these lefty Matts.
That's right.
Or lefty whingers, as Kevin likes to call me. I just think a couple of things. So the purpose of prison is a deterrent. Let's get a few facts right. Everyone says, a couple of hours. It was nearly 4 hours. I think it was 3 hours, 50 minutes before she got rid of it. She'd done some previous tweets that are racist. She did.
I don't know about the previous tweets that are racist. I know she'd previously talked about.
I've read them.
Well, maybe she did. I don't know. Can we authenticate? I'm not defending anything, but I don't know what they were. Were they racist, or were they just not to your agreement?
No, I won't say what it was because it's racist. But then you've got, I'll call the mental health card. Said something like, I think this is going to get my husband into trouble, and basically, she showed no remorse. And during the sentencing, and you've got to read the sentencing thing.
I think she did show remorse.
No, I believe she did. If you read the sentencing remarks, it virtually implies that there was very little, and it was only after she'd done this anyway. But let's get a few points.
Very quickly, Matt.
31 months. It could have been 7 years. She's only going to serve 40% of that. That's 12 months, 12 and a half months. That's the deterrent.
Did she really want to set fire to anybody? Really? I think that's central to the issue. But, of course, that's a point for another day. Matthew, thank you very much. I have to leave it there. We hit the clock. Our lines are open. News at 2 coming next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Three minutes after 2 o'clock. Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back to the home of common sense. What do we got here? US Vice President J.D. Vance slamming Britain's free speech laws, even citing the Lucy Connolly jail sentence, plus the high number of arrests over online posts. Critics are calling for outdated hate crime laws to be scrapped. And there lies the big problem. More on that. How do we save freedom of speech? I just think we need a politician to get real and say that all the laws that surround this are not fit for purpose in the modern age. Would that be a start? Also, Donald Trump has attacked Keir Starmer's net zero drive, urging the UK to abandon renewables in favour of more North Sea drilling and return to good old-fashioned fossil fuels. Drill, baby, drill. Or drill, Keir, drill, he says. Thoughts on that as well. And footage released by the US Coast Guard has captured the exact moment the Titan submersible imploded on its way to the Titanic, with the wife of OceanGate CEO heard asking, "What was that bang?" unaware that it was actually the fatal blast. It's a disturbing story. We covered this live at the time, and we'll return to that update a little later in the programme. 0344 499 1000. George in Dorset says, free speech, we need to go back to sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. View of the world. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Then I suppose somebody comes along and says, well, why have you said this on Twitter? Is that okay? Go round and murder Alf at number 43 because he's a git. No, you can't really do that. That's true. That's very specific. But you also get into the, one lawyer will argue that the Lucy Connolly tweet was quite specific. It clearly wasn't. It was very general. It did absolutely sound like somebody sounding off in a pub, didn't it? If I had my way, I'd stick them, blah, blah, blah. People say stuff. They say rubbish. They say offensive things. And when you're angry at a time like this, against a backdrop of all of this, they say things that they wouldn't perhaps say in real life, or they wouldn't say it out loud. And forgetting that when you publish or when you put something on social media, you haven't just posted to some like-minded mates. You've published it to the world exactly the same way as a book or a newspaper or a political party might publish something. You're subjected to the same rules and regulations. And it does go back to that Section 19 of the 1986 Public Order Act. 40 years on, that is the law that's being used to deal with people on social media. That's got to change. I don't know where the line is, and there's the problem. I don't think anybody does, which is why they're scared. And of course, what governments want, what law enforcement wants, are areas where things are nice and calm, because it's the job of the criminal justice system, i.e. the government, to keep things calm. So when they spot something that isn't calm, the emergence of social media has shown that. Years ago, if they could have found all those people in pubs saying bad, hurty words, they'd have been round there. But it was you couldn't have done that. Now you can do that, so they're doing it. There is another interpretation, and that is that governments, including this one, particularly this one, do not like the views of some people, so they clamp down hard. True or false? 0344 499 1000. Let's speak on this and the other big stories of the day. We've got Robert Taylor back with us, the journalist and the broadcaster. Always good to have you on, Robert, as we shoehorn ourselves into a nice bank holiday weekend. Currently the sun is shining. Don't know if it's going to last, but what will last, of course, is some fine opinion from your good self on the big stories of the day, including, I thought this was interesting that we're talking about free speech today. We've had the first Labour MP who's come out and been slightly perturbed by the sentence given to Lucy Connolly. It's not normally in Labour's DNA to talk in this area because it sounds like you're defending racism or something like that, so they normally leave it alone regardless of what they actually think. Mary Glindon, who's Newcastle upon Tyne East and Wallsend MP, has said that she thought it was unduly harsh, so there's one voice on the left at least. I think there are others, by the way.
Yeah, it's really good to hear that. I mean, the tweet from Lucy Connolly was no doubt really offensive. It was fairly horrible, but she has a right to express her view. We should have, in a free society, a right to be offensive, quite frankly. I don't think that she actually incited hate. I think anyone who looked at that tweet would be thinking, well, she's a bit of a nutter and she's having a really bad day. But certainly not 2 years in prison at a time here where our prisons are absolutely chocker full. We're trying to release prisoners and we're putting people into prison for a stupid, offensive tweet. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, there's something really strange about it. And I understand all the arguments that, it's against the backdrop of a delicate time and, riots were about to start and already tensions had begun to spill over via social media that began the rumour that this was, somebody who just arrived on a boat and then made their way to Southport and carried out these horrendous killings and misinformation. And, it's not a pretty place, social media. We know that. But as it stands, Bob in Arbroath is as legally bound to adhere to the laws of the land of publishing as the editor of the Daily Telegraph. And that sounds, when you put it like that, you think that's a bit weird, isn't it?
Well, the law is just simply out of date for all the reasons you've just said. I think the bar for hate speech is way, way too low. And the way I usually judge these things is to go back to that old quote, was it Voltaire, who said, I might despise what you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it. And I think, broadly speaking, that's what we should go by. Of course, there are limits. No one can scream fire in a crowded theatre or cinema, because that's free speech that's going to lead to death. But the bar is way too low, and we've got to get new regulations for dealing with the modern age of social media.
Yeah, I think so. And I look, good luck to the person that has to do it. But I do sense there isn't really a political appetite, because taking this on is like taking on another world, isn't it? Given that the curious nature of this discussion, I suppose, Robert, is that social media has more than one purpose. Because whilst it does have the Wild West, the people with loose mouths, ill-informed opinions, inflammatory, left or right, whatever, it has all of that. But simultaneously, it has the biggest broadcasters in the world, using it to publish news. It has organisations from F1 to the FA who will use it to, show that great goal or discuss that, new team signing for Lewis Hamilton. It's got all of these other elements where it's really good. It's the best magazine that was ever invented. I know someone who only follows motor racing news. They don't follow anything else. They don't follow anyone else. They just have about 12 accounts they follow, and they have the best magazine of Formula One and motor racing you could ever imagine. And it sits there every day, and it's always refreshed. There's always new stories. Brilliant. What's not to like? And it's free as well. So that's the great side of it. But the bad side is Bob in Arbroath sometimes gets a little bit salty and a little bit libelous and a little bit iffy when it comes to his language.
And anyone who's been a journalist on Twitter, or X as it is now, will have received abuse at some stage. I know I have, and it can be pretty appalling, but I don't call in the police. And the other thing here, Ian, is that I wonder if Lucy Connolly, instead of targeting an asylum home, had instead said we need to burn down Reform HQ, kill everyone inside. Would she now be in prison for 30 months? Somehow I doubt it. So there's that two-tier element that's going on here that we have every right to be concerned about.
But I also imagine, in fact, I don't imagine, I'm pretty sure, Robert, that people will have different views depending on what. And with the Lucy Connolly thing, I think there are many people defending Lucy Connolly for different reasons. I come at this from a basic freedom of speech issue and an issue of the abuse of the social justice system, of the justice system. But others, I think, might be defending her because they actually agreed with what she said, so that takes them there. They wouldn't necessarily even bother to defend a similar freedom of speech case if it was about something else or came from a different political angle, maybe.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm with you 100%. I mean, I think what she wrote was completely odious. I mean, I wouldn't want to spend any time in her company, quite frankly. I don't care how bad a day she was having, but she shouldn't be in prison for it. She has a right to express herself if she so wishes. And, of course, she quickly regretted it and deleted it. I cannot see how in a sane society this is a matter for the police, the courts and prison.
Yeah, spot on. Something that should be a matter of prison is the person that negotiated the 30 billion quid Chagos deal, because that should be a custodial offence if ever there was one. Keir Starmer's deal, which originally was going to cost a fraction of that, could be up to 30 billion. That far exceeds the initial claims, Robert. And it does seem that, you know, even with the best will in the world, and I've tried to look at this and find, you know, because we had James Cleverly on with us yesterday, and he, of course, is distancing himself very much from this. It's not the deal I would have signed, etc. But it did begin under, I think, under Liz Truss originally, and then, you know, eventually Cleverly gets hold of this. Given the task of trying to sort it out as Foreign Secretary. I think it comes from a series of legal challenges that there were United Nations and whoever else that were going to say, essentially, these islands need to be given to Mauritius. And while all of that legal toing and froing would have gone on, the UK and the US would have been impotent in terms of the security considerations for that territory. So as a result, they've kind of cobbled together this deal to say, OK, we'll give it to you, but we keep this bit.
Yeah, that's a very fair summary of what's happened, although I still don't really understand why these islands should belong to Mauritius.
Correct.
They were never part of Mauritius. The reason they're going to Mauritius is because apparently when all this was part of the British Empire, the Chagos Islands were administered from a British office in Mauritius. As far as I can see it, that's the only link to Mauritius. They're actually nearer to, is it the Seychelles, I think?
Probably, yes.
The Maldive Islands or something. They're over 1,000 miles from Mauritius. So why they're going there? The other element here is, I'm afraid, Keir Starmer massaging the figures, claiming this is going to cost 3.4 billion. And learned economists work out it's going to be 10 times that amount.
Yeah.
Starmer already has a reputation for epic flip-flopping, for bending the truth, for doing one thing having said he wouldn't, and not doing something he said he would. And now he's trying to pull the wool over our eyes about the true cost of this deal. I think it's been an appalling week for the Prime Minister, and I'm not surprised that his opinion poll ratings are going through the floor.
Yeah. And let's move to this story. Talking to the Prime Minister, they might go even further through the floor. Another attack from Trump, this time on net zero. Donald Trump has criticised Starmer and those net zero plans, urging the UK to simply prioritise North Sea oil drilling over renewables. Drill, Keir, drill, says Mr. Trump.
Yeah, this is one of the very few areas that Donald Trump and Tony Blair appear to agree on it. So it's only last month that Tony Blair said Labour's net zero approach is, I think I'm accurate quote it, doomed to fail, said Tony Blair. And of course, Trump is saying exactly the same thing. Why is Britain wearing this net zero hair shirt? 4 times the energy prices of elsewhere, and certainly 4 times what they are in the US. So we're paying through the nose for energy. We're pursuing this net zero agenda, and the rest of the world isn't, as far as I can see. Why are we doing this to ourselves? We've got all that North Sea oil. I don't agree with everything that Donald Trump says, but I think he's right on this one.
Yeah, you know, make it a parallel thing. You know, get one thing up and running, but don't, you know, shove concrete into the ground to cover up a very precious resource that could be saving us a good buck in the meantime. Listen, Robert, we hit the clock, but thank you as ever. Have a great bank holiday weekend. Robert Taylor, the journalist and broadcaster, with us here on the programme. One in from Cam, who says, what has been done to the British people that they are happy to be locked up for their speech? I don't want to be in this country anymore. I'm only 26. To save free speech, we need to test the boundaries of that speech en masse. We need to publicly express our feelings. They can't arrest us all, can they? And I think this whole thing it's really just about social media. This has only come around because of social media, and the non-crime hate incidents apparently mostly happen, I think, on social media. Lucy Connolly, the former cop that was raided, handcuffed and arrested for what was said to be they thought it was an anti-Semitic speech. It was actually the other way round. He was attacking something that he felt was either anti-Semitic or, you know, certainly something he disagreed with. And then that was established. Oh, sorry, nothing to see here. But in the meantime, he gets a police caution, handcuffed, spent time in a cell, and dragged through the mud. So this is mostly social media stuff or the digital world. A few of these cases have been things that happened on WhatsApp. Facebook, somebody who'd put the wrong flag up, someone who'd insulted a bloke pretending to be a woman. And the miserable list goes on. The bit that I don't understand, because I get the kind of intellectual argument that it's not, this is not a, there wasn't a plan, there wasn't a Cobra meeting. And by the way, this does predate Starmer, it goes way back. There wasn't a Cobra meeting with Cameron or May or Boris or anyone that said, right, we've got to get really harsh on people saying some bad stuff on Twitter. It's just it began to happen and sort of went out of control because somebody reports it. I can remember years ago somebody saying you have no idea, the police saying you have no idea how often we're called out now to disputes that are because of a row that started on Facebook. So, really? Yes. My neighbour has just said on Facebook she's going to come around my house and kill me. What did you do? I called her a silly old cow. Why did you call her a silly old cow? Because she had a go at my kid. Why should you have a go at your kid? Oh, because my kid pooed in their garden. I don't know. Whatever. And they said there's something weird happening here. This was before, if it wasn't before Twitter, it was before Twitter became a thing, as it were, and certainly before the many other sort of offshoots of X or Twitter. And it's just sort of got out of control. Nobody knows quite what to do about it. But the bit that I don't get, if you're the sergeant or whoever's in charge at the police station, why there aren't more voices there that go, do you know what, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to say, I've got half a dozen shops being raided round the corner by Dodge Pop McDougal and his mates. And I've got a fella over here who said that he thinks the rainbow flag is a bit gay. Well, it is it's quite a lot gay, actually, the rainbow flag. It's a very gay flag. In fact, you could almost say it's the gay flag, mostly. Yeah, I know it's other things too, many other things these days. But you might think that, so it's that bit that I still scratch my head on. I talk to police officers all the time, and I've not met one that agrees with it. So where does that bit come from? But it doesn't come from Keir Starmer, it doesn't come from Boris Johnson, doesn't come from Liz Truss, Theresa May, David Cameron or any other Prime Minister, apparently. But what is the state scared of? Our lines are open. This is Talk.
Not only are we giving them to Mauritius for mysterious reasons, we're saying as well as giving them to you, would it be okay if we gave you 9 billion quid? We're doing that as well. The deal is absolutely mystifying, baffling. I have no idea what it's all about, apart from the only possible reason, as you say, David, is a kind of treacherous hatred of Britain and these old lefties trying to assuage their guilt about British colonialism. It's pathetic.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
And the microphone wasn't plugged in. Only for 30, well, how long was it? 6 seconds? That's how quick I can operate. This comes in from Cam, who says, what's been done to the... Oh, I think I just read that. I apologise. Nigel Brown says, reference Doctor Who, which was the other story we were talking about. The thing with Doctor Who, the BBC, Labour and the Conservatives is that they've already lost. People aren't going back to them, and they've found better alternatives. These groups and others just need to wake up, smell the roses, and realise this is self-destruction and nothing else. Fair point. Now, the Police Federation says releasing violent offenders early to ease overcrowding puts public and safety and officers' safety at risk. Under government plans, of course, we talked about this yesterday, some criminals could walk free after serving just a third of their sentence. 20 prisons will also trial chemical castration for sex offenders as part of wider reforms. While supporting better rehab, they're demanding talks with the government to keep safety front and centre. Let's speak with Brian Booth, Acting Deputy National Chair at the Police Federation. Brian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Always nice to speak. Look, I saw one of your members making the point that, you know, you didn't really come into policing to see these kind of results or these things to happen. You lock up the bad guys, the last thing you want to see is half an hour later they come walking out again.
It's truly disheartening. I mean, my colleagues must be shaking their head in the stations. You know, they work really hard compiling evidence to put before the courts, and the courts then decide a suitable punishment. Offenders go to prison, and now we're learning they're going to be released early. It must be absolutely disheartening. And at a time when policing really does struggle to cope with its demand. So people getting released early does have that potential to impact further work on my overworked colleagues already.
Absolutely, and it must be, you know, and you guys at the Federation all know what it's like to, you know, see the same faces on the street. You know, prison officers tell the same story. Here he comes again. He was out for a couple of months and now he's back again. And there is a risk factor to this, isn't there? There's a risk factor for your members, for officers, and a risk factor to the public. If violent offenders, and some of these people will be violent, domestic abusers, some real wrong-uns, you know, not nice people who are going to find themselves coming out quite generously early, there is a risk to that.
There is. 45,000 of my colleagues were assaulted last year. So the Police Federation's campaigned to get sentences extended. Now, some of these sentences do fall into the very short period of 12 to 2 years when they're dealt with. And again, it's an absolute kick in the teeth for officers to see these people who are violent individuals. They will think nothing of assaulting the public if they assault police officers, getting released early.
Is there any part of the Police Federation, when it comes to areas like this, that are invited around the table over there, either at the Home Office or wherever else, the Justice Department, to give a comment on this? Because, you know, you guys are at the coalface, ultimately.
We really do want to speak to the Justice Secretary about this, to raise our concerns on behalf of those members. I do understand the prison population is full and it does create issues, but I think there are unintended consequences when we have rush policy coming through when we are not consulted. And some of those elements of police officers are struggling to cope with demand now. You know, we have a real issue with officers actually, they've had enough. We've got a campaign running at the moment, Copped Enough, and we're highlighting the difficulties officers face with workloads that they just cannot keep up with. And what we've seen is a 142% increase in police leavers since 2018. That should be sending a real clear flag to policymakers within government, and also getting us to come back into the room to raise some of them concerns.
Yeah, and I mean, the job is hard enough. In a month or two, the annual Police Federation Bravery Awards will take place, of course. If anyone wants an education on what officers face, then they'll be able to look online and just see some of those stories, because they are truly horrific, and many of them do not end well for individual officers, as we sadly know all too well. And those that do survive the most challenging and most extraordinary, horrendous acts of violence and dilemma that happen on a day-to-day basis, have to live with that and go out and do it again. So the last thing you need, knowing that it's one of the few jobs in the world when you walk out the door in the morning, you don't know whether you're going to walk back in the evening, or you don't know whether you're going to walk back in with, anything as what will be seen as minor, a big kick in the shin, which hurts, by the way. And that sort of stuff, as you know better than me, Brian, doesn't even get reported these days, or something worse than that. So the job is, there for all to see. Violence against police officers, issues surrounding the welfare of police officers, very much, I think, neglected by, various governments over the years. And the last thing you want to know is that the perpetrators of those kind of crimes are going to be walking out of jail in a far more generous way than they thought they were previously.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We will watch with interest, Brian. I hope your team and those at the Federation are able to get, that audience really with the Justice Secretary, because it needs to be heard. Always good to speak. Brian, thank you. Brian Booth, Acting Deputy National Chair of the Police Federation, on that issue of... It's funny, isn't it? The laws of... Well, not even unintended consequences. When you talk about, an early release programme, some institutions have to deal with these characters. It's all very well going, there's a bit of domestic violence, and he used to have a scrap every Friday night in the high street because he likes a drink. But he's only going to serve about 3 minutes of his sentence. Yeah, there's a consequence to that, i.e. people like Brian and his colleagues have got to go out there and deal with it. Back to free speech. Claire in the Wirral, what have you got for us? Claire, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. It's just about this stamping down on free speech. Where did it come from?
Yeah.
Actually, it's been going on for centuries. It's a way of controlling people. It's controlling people through fear. Stalin was very good at doing this, and he sort of, if a neighbour or somebody heard somebody saying something that the regime didn't agree with, they'd get informed. They were encouraged to inform on each other. It's kind of a little bit like what, if you're in the pub and the barman hears something, inform on them. It's happening. Starmer's very, very... I mean, we all sort of laugh at Starmer and say he's stupid and he doesn't know what he's doing from one day to the next. I believe that Starmer knew exactly what he was going to do before he came into power. He's had a lot of time.
Sure. But all this stuff, just to interject there, all this stuff does predate Starmer, of course. The non-crime hate incidents happened under the Tories, people going to jail for things on social media or getting raided, all of that stuff. We began these debates way before anybody had even heard of Keir Starmer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. But it's a very, very left-wing thing. And I wouldn't really say that the Conservative Party, I mean, that was their demise. They weren't conservative, they weren't right-wing or, centrist. They were very left-wing, and everything just unravelled with them. But, I do really feel that, Starmer, he's a closet Corbynite. I mean, he's giving everything away, isn't he? But he knew what he was going to do. And what happened with Lucy Connolly is that she's been made an example of. In fact, Starmer was in control. I mean, our establishment, our judiciary, are very radical, very, very, radical judiciary. And Starmer said he wants anyone that was involved during the riots in Southport, he wanted them clamping down on.
But wouldn't any, in fairness to any Prime Minister, when there's turmoil on your streets and police officers are having the bricks thrown at them and people are starting fires and wrecking the place, isn't your job as the Prime Minister to say, you know, I hope these people are dealt with very severely by the courts? Isn't that how it's always worked?
I just think it's really got out of hand.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it really has got out of hand. And I think, really, you can look at the Tare Hills, what happened there. Yeah. You know, I mean, it is two-tier. He knew that his policies were going to be unpopular with the vast majority of the public. And so he knew that he had to come down hard. And actually, I don't believe it's just the judiciary that have said this about Lucy Connolly. I think that Starmer has actually had a word in their shell, like, and said, you know what, keep her inside, because I do feel, Ian, that this country is a tinderbox at the moment. It's like a tinderbox that's going to go off. Well, and he knows it. And I just think that he's you know, he wants an example. That what happens is that he's ruling through fear. People are fearful. If they don't say the right things, if they don't say the party line, as in happened in Russia, they're going to be in trouble, and people are fearful. And he wants them to be in fear because this is the way he controls the public.
Well, there it is. Listen, I've got to step in at that point, Claire, because we've overshot time, but there's a lot in there. I mean, the idea that Keir Starmer would have, and thank you to Claire in the Will, Keir Starmer would have, you know, had a word with somebody specifically about an individual. I was having a conversation with Chris on social media the other day, and he was suggesting that somebody, not necessarily Starmer, somebody right up there, would have spoken to those duty solicitors who were advising people to plead guilty rather than not guilty, although most of them were guilty, technically speaking, which is why I think they were advised to. He thinks that they were got to. Somebody said, you know, you need to make sure you advise your client. Now, my response to that is, that would be a story bigger than the post office scandal, particularly if the Prime Minister was involved. And this stuff does have a habit of coming out at some point. So if you put all that together, we'd be looking at something bigger than the post office scandal, that people were sent to jail based on a sneaky word from Keir Starmer. By the way, I think most of those judges would hate Keir Starmer as well. Every time I speak to somebody in the legal profession who knew Starmer when he was climbing the greasy pole, I always tend to say this was not, you know, this is not the guy you know, oh God, it's not him again. There was a bit of that going on. But that's another story. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
By the way, we've got a brand new Voice of Doom. Hooray! In around about 10 minutes' time. Stand by for all of that. This comes in from Simon, who says, yes, the USA does have free speech protection via the First Amendment. However, it does have certain exceptions, like incitement to violence, defamation or obscenity. They are obsessed with obscenity. Man alive. They're obsessed with obscenity. The problem the UK has is free speech laws not defined by law, but by opinions on who is offended. Outside of the above legislative American framework, our free speech is mainly policed by pure opinion and the sensitivity of the offended complainant, or dare I say, the political persuasion of the judges who reside. The guidelines are as foggy as a very foggy day on the Tyne, says Simon. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, that the perception we all used to have of judges up to about half an hour ago was they were all, you know, Tory toffs that had found their way to the most senior level of the legal world and got themselves ermine-clad and wigs and gavels, and these are people that owned half of Worcestershire and things like that, dined with Thatcher at the weekend. Now, apparently, they're all like Citizen Smith left-wing radicals. I think the thing with judges, generally speaking, having covered enough kind of court cases and sat there throughout, is that most of them, and there's some obvious wonky exceptions, are so darn clever and impressive when it comes to the law. You know, when you think you've seen a judge, if you've ever been in a courtroom, you think the judge is asleep. Look, he's fast asleep. And then suddenly the judge will spring out of nowhere and cite a law from 1652 as to why the witness is talking nonsense, or why a particular prosecutor or a defence counsel has no right to exercise that question or include that bit of evidence. They do tend to be switched on and spot on, and of course judges have some wiggle room, but essentially go by the law of the land. And also the feel of the land as well, which I think is what happened after Southport. We'll go back to your calls in a couple of moments' time. I just want to bring in this story. US Coast Guard footage shows the moment that the Titan sub imploded, killing all 5 people on board, including OceanGate CEO Stockton Rush and 4 others. His wife in the clip is heard asking, "What was that bang?" unaware it was the fatal blast. This is a BBC documentary revealing new findings that the Titan's hull began failing a year before the dive. Let's speak to Simon Boxall, oceanographer, lecturer at the University of Southampton. Simon, good afternoon to you. I mean, look, what we've kind of heard here and seen here is in many respects nothing new. Many people in this world thought there was probably something not quite worthy about this mode of getting down that deep. And, you know, we were aware of an implosion. So the drama of hearing a bang is clearly disturbing, and particularly since one of the crew's wives was there to hear that is horrific. But we sort of were aware that this was not necessarily seaworthy, shall I say.
Good afternoon, Ian. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, you know, the design of the Titan was, I think Stockton Rush called it revolutionary. I think most people in the marine industry called it foolish. You know, carbon fibre, which is its main tube, is not the best material to use for anything in the sea. Carbon fibre, Kevlar, these things are great on land, but they don't work underwater, particularly in seawater. But also the fact it's a tube. There's a reason why most bathyspheres, you know, deep sea submersibles that people go down in tend to be spherical, and they tend to be either glass or titanium. And these are materials that are used widely in the industry. But carbon fibre, a tube, it was really asking for disaster.
To your knowledge, had they, from an outsider's point of view, I would imagine that, you know, they would drop one of these things into the ocean with the equivalent weight of X amount of people in it to test it out first. Would that not be the standard way something like this would happen?
I mean, this had done other missions, so this wasn't a unique mission for it. And they would have done some calculations and some pressure testing. But I think this size is difficult to pressure test fully without sending it down there. And they would have done that. The problem is the carbon fibre starts to delaminate. It starts to deteriorate after time, particularly in seawater. And this is the problem. And the stresses and strains on this sort of submersible are phenomenal. So if you look at some of the previous submersibles going down to the deep ocean, some of those, you know, James Cameron went down to the Marianas Trench years ago, only the second voyage to the deepest part of the ocean. After that, that submersible was never used to those depths again because the stresses and strains on that are phenomenal. So, you know, it's unfortunate that It was a really bad design. It hadn't been maintained. There were no rules and regulations in terms of its design, its use once in international waters. And this is where it started to fall down, really.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that lack of rules and regulations. And of course, now there are all sorts of legal ramifications around this, as we would imagine. And that question will be asked, what on earth was this company thinking of? They would have everything you've just said, Simon, at least one person around the table when they were planning this would have raised the same fairly fundamental concern.
Absolutely. And I think concerns were raised by various people. And I think they were brushed off as being sort of panicking for no reason whatsoever. Yeah. And then, of course, there was the actual incident itself. And I think what's tragic is that I think most people in the industry, most people, certainly we were responsible for talking about it, sort of reporting on it through various media outlets. And I think, in our heart of hearts, we knew that it had gone. And, we'd heard rumours that there was a sort of a pop. It's very difficult to communicate underwater with a remote vehicle. You can't use radio waves. You can't use the sort of standard methods we would use normally. You rely on sound, which is why there would have been a hydrophone in the water. The problem is there are lots of noises in the ocean. But the fact that it disappeared at about the same time as the pop was heard, one would never say, that's it, it's gone. You must do your best to try and do a rescue mission, find out whether that was the case. But unfortunately, I think people on board, and certainly people in the industry, would have gone, yeah, that's probably it.
Yeah. And without getting too gory about this, but I would imagine an implosion at that depth, that level of pressure, would be a fairly instantaneous catastrophe.
They wouldn't know what happened. So, the people down there wouldn't have suffered. It wouldn't have been a question of it was a slow sort of, we're doomed. It would have been unexpected, unannounced, instantaneous. So that's the only, if there is such a thing as a silver cloud, that's the silver cloud, this rather dark cloud.
Are we aware of any sort of agitators who are attempting now to change laws so that this can't happen again? What is the sort of latest word on this? As you rightly say, it's a free world. These are international waters. You or I could turn up tomorrow and drop ourselves into the water in a ball and decide to give it a go. We probably wouldn't survive, but we'd give it we could do that without any legal recourse.
There is no recourse because it's international waters, and even in national waters, if, for example, there's the story of a chap who sets off on a regular basis from Cornwall. I don't think he's done it for a few years now, literally in a bathtub to cross the Atlantic. He never gets much more than about half a mile offshore and gets pulled back by the RNLI. There's nothing to stop him doing that. In fact, there's nothing to stop you or I going out and buying a sort of 100-foot yacht without any qualifications, without any sort of experience, and sailing it off into the sunset. It's not like a car or a truck. We've got to have a license. You don't even need a license for some reason.
It's kind of weird, that, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, and certainly, I think with a lot of these projects, we may have discussed this before, Simon, but I think there's clearly, and I don't say this to be deliberately smart, but there is some vanity around some of these projects as well.
Absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. In terms of licensing, if you're using a commercial vessel, one that's taking paid money, and this is a grey area in this case, then you do need to have qualifications, and they're quite extensive. But I mean, in this case, why do you want to go down in a submersible? Phenomenally expensive.
Yeah.
I think it's a question of there are too many billionaires with nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And that we would never use that for science. We would send down a remotely operated vehicle. If that goes wrong, it's cost us a few tens of millions of pounds potentially, but no one dies. When this goes wrong, as we see, people are killed, and there is no reason to send down a submersible with people inside because there's no benefit apart from the thrill.
Yeah, and using an Xbox controller to navigate this thing, and I think lights inside that were bought from the local camping store.
Yes, I think it says it all, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. It is a terribly sad story and will remain so forever. Listen, Simon, thank you as ever for your expertise. Simon Boxall, oceanographer, lecturer at University of Southampton. I mean, it's very, very difficult to kind of get your head around quite how the entire mission was planned and how individuals volunteered without the full, the kind of satisfaction levels you would need levels to satisfy yourself, I should say, that every safety box had been ticked. You'd want to see that in black and white, wouldn't you? You want to know everything, you know. The minute you walked in there and saw somebody with an Xbox controller, you might go, are you really, should you be using that? Let's have a little listen then to the moment. This is the horrendous moment from the BBC documentary called Implosion, the Titanic sub disaster. And this is that moment when they heard the bang and the CEO's wife hearing that implosion. Here it is.
Stockton Rush's wife Wendy is waiting for messages from the sub as it nears the sea floor.
What was that bang? So at that point you said, what was that bang? What was that bang? I'm going to back up and play it one more time. It sounds like a door slamming. Yeah. What was that bang?
The noise is a sound of Titan imploding. But moments later, Wendy Rush gets a message from the sub.
Drop 2 weights. Titan, drop 2 weights.
She mistakenly seems to think everything's okay. But in fact, it's taken longer for the message to arrive than the sound of the implosion. Everyone on board is dead.
Wow. I mean, you can't, that's quite haunting to hear that. You can't make that up. So the verbal message took so much time that it came after the implosion. And you heard the implosion. The bang is kind of a crack, the sound of something completely condensing, and of course destroying life inside it as well. Disturbing, and of course the world of the ocean and those that attempt these kind of deep dives and missions to see things like the Titanic and other wrecks will continue to scratch their heads and wonder if there is ever going to be a fully safer way to do this. Details to come. 0344 499 1000.
Not only are we giving them to Mauritius for mysterious reasons, we're saying, as well as giving them to you, would it be okay if we gave you 9 billion quid? We're doing that as well. The deal is absolutely mystifying, baffling. I have no idea what it's all about, apart from the only possible reason, as you say, David, is a kind of treacherous hatred of Britain and these old lefties trying to assuage their guilt about British colonialism. It's pathetic.
Across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is
It is 10 to 3 on Talk. Welcome back. Let's do the Voice of Doom, because we've got a brand new Voice of Doom. Oh, very excited about this. The last one went on for 14 days till yesterday. It was John Denham, former Community Secretary under Gordon Brown. The previous one went on for, I think, 21 days. I can't even remember who that was now. Dave, can you remember who that was? It was Dave that put it together. No, that was yesterday. The one before that. The one that went on for... Stephen Byers, that's right, Stephen Byers, former Transport Secretary. It's sometimes a politician, not always a politician, sometimes it's somebody just connected, obviously connected, publicly, very publicly connected to politics. past or present. So here's, I think this one's going to go. I don't know. Have a listen.
We don't believe that.
Oh, that is quite... Yeah, it's going to go, isn't it? If you think you know, 87222, give it a go. Here it is again.
We don't believe that.
We don't believe that. But who doesn't believe that? Who is that? 87222. Hopefully we'll get a right answer. We can tell you after the headlines at 3. If we don't, it rolls over to Tuesday, because we're not here on Monday. I think, is David Ball here on Monday? I think David Ball is here on Monday. You're always in a safe pair of hands with David Ball. Here's the voice again.
We don't believe that.
87222, if you think you know. Back to the calls. Lenny is in Ashford. How you doing, Lenny?
I'm tickety-boo, thank you, Ian.
I'm glad to hear it. There's nothing better than a bit of tickety-booness coming out of Ashford these days. So,
no, that's good.
What have you got for us, Len?
Well, when Starmer first came to power, on James Max's programme, I predicted that we were going to live in a police state. And what happened? And since then, I've been Xing a lot about the loss we have got of free speech. Now, when Starmer did that deal the other day, and he said this has put us on the world stage.
This was the EU deal, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah. Well, when he did that, he was all proud. He said, this has put us on the world stage. And I said, we're already on the world stage, but for the wrong reason.
Okay.
And that is like when Vance was with Starmer, he commented on our lack of free speech. And he's done it again recently.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And what Starmer doesn't realise, he believes the lies that he tells. And what the trouble is, the rest of the world are looking at us, and Starmer's reputation and the reputation of our country is laughable.
I got a feeling, Lenny,
he carries on.
Just on that point, and I can't qualify this, but I'm sure I read recently that Germany have a bigger problem with people getting nabbed for stuff they said on social media. I don't know what the evidence for that is off the top of my head. I'll find it. It was something, a piece I read that said something like second to only Germany, you know, we have this issue. But of course it does predate Starmer, Lenny. I'm not saying this because I like Starmer, because my views on him are clearly very well known.
That's right.
But it does go before him, and the non-crime hate incident stuff, you know, was invented under the Conservatives, and it flourished under the Conservatives.
I totally agree with you, Ian, but that would explain what Starmer's got in common with Europe.
Well, it might do, but I mean, Australia also isn't out of the picture on this one. Remember, during lockdown, there's some extraordinary moments of the police. I think there was a New South Wales, I assume it was Sydney, but there was certainly somebody in New South Wales whose home was raided because she talked about having a get-together or something, and 17 coppers turned up. I mean, it is a bit of a global thing, this.
Well, the world is going the wrong way, isn't it?
Well, is it because we just haven't worked out how to, what social... Because nearly all of this stuff is social media related, right?
It is.
So is that the bit we haven't yet worked out? You know, how do we deal with it? Where do we place it? Is it the same as, you know, I keep saying it, in theory, if you post something, Lenny, on X that you do, then you're subjected to the same law of the land as the publisher of the Daily Telegraph. And I think that's wrong. That's not right. Because you wouldn't, if you were down there at the Locomotive pub in Ashford, then, and you were just to sound off about something, I don't imagine you'd be, you know, in front of the judge or having your door broken in.
Well, when I go on X, I look at it that I am talking to all my friends.
Correct.
Because a lot of them X me back, and we have a debate on the comments we both make.
That's meant to be the general point, isn't it? But I guess some people don't really think about... I mean, the amount of times I've messaged someone politely and said, mate, you might want to take that down. You've literally just libelled somebody quite famous or whatever, sometimes people go, do you know what, I didn't even think, and they take it down. Other times they dig their heels in and go, I don't care. It's like, well, you will care when somebody takes your house off you, because there are, at the moment, there are rules around that, and that's the bit that I suppose we're struggling with.
Well, I'll be quiet. I'm not very clever with a computer and with the modern age here, and I really struggle. So, but the one thing, one rule I go by, I do not talk about violence or encourage violence, or we must do that. That is one rule that I make sure I stay away from.
I think you should probably be in jail, Lenny. That's all I'm saying. I'm going to go through every tweet or X or post that you've ever put there, and I'm going to send the constabulary round to your place.
Well, if you did, if it was possible, I would tell your Uncle Jimmy what you've done to me.
Oh, wow. Good old Uncle Jimmy. Sadly, no longer with us.
He was the loveliest man. I know him very well.
Did you? You've never told me that before.
Yes, I did.
Did you tell me?
Yeah, I did. We had a conversation many years ago.
Wow.
But he was one man that I had a lot of respect for. Yeah.
How did you... I know this is a conversation for another time. How did you get to know my Uncle Jimmy, just going back, Lenny?
Through Ashford Market.
Through the market, because he was a farmer,
Yeah,
of course.
because I used to buy and sell a lot of things in the market.
Yep.
And your Uncle Jimmy used to work there periodically.
Yeah, Hobbs Parker he was working for a while,
He did, yes.
Yeah. Got it. Wow, he was a top man.
Yeah, and I've shared a table with him many times.
That's lovely to hear. Lenny, thank you. Yeah, he'll be with you in spirit if you do end up in Clink, I can tell you that much. Lenny in Ashford, thank you very much indeed. Who knew me Uncle Jimmy? Sadly no longer with us. What a lovely man Jimmy was as well. George in Dundee, who I don't think does know my Uncle Jimmy, George, but you might do.
No, I didn't think I do.
He spoke very well of you.
We can't hear Lenny in the jail, by the way. That's.
I know. We'll all campaign for him. We've not got long, George, but I'm sure you can do it. What are you thinking?
Yeah, a quick anecdote for you about free speech and how it's been on the wane for a lot longer than people think.
Yeah.
15 years ago, I'm at the football, and Dundee are losing to Motherwell, and a Motherwell player goes down very easily, very softly under a challenge. And an old geezer in the crowd, who I think was about 70 at the time, around about that mark, stands up and shouts, "For God's sake, get up, you big Jesse," which is the equivalent in England terms, I would say.
Yeah, you big Jesse, I get it. Yeah. What happened? He didn't get arrested, did he?
He was asked to leave the ground and he left. Wow. And he was asked to leave because of homophobic language.
Oh my God. And of course, calling somebody a big Jesse is not homophobic language at all. George, I have to cut in. We've literally hit the clock. Voice of Doom answer coming next on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back. Lots to get through in this hour. We are, of course, continuing to take your calls and comments on US Vice President J.D. Vance, reiterating the problem with Britain's free speech laws. He's citing the Lucy Connolly case there and the high number of arrests over online posts. The Americans can't get their head around this one. Critics are calling for outdated hate crime laws as well to be scrapped, and that is one of the problems I sense from those original laws, not really fit for the online world today. More on the way from you. Also this afternoon, the Prime Minister has been accused of lying to the public after claiming a deal with the Chagos Islands to hand it over to Mauritius would cost £3.4 billion. Apparently the true figure could exceed £30 billion. What is going on there? No one can still quite get to the bottom of why the heck they're going that way anyway. We'll talk to John Redwood in just a couple of moments' time. And the latest Talk Crime series is back. We speak to a campaigner who spent 20 years fighting drink spiking and led the push to make it a specific offence. This is as the Prime Minister now promises new laws to help more victims come forward. Everybody would support that, of course. It's an interesting story. It doesn't get the airtime perhaps it should do, but we'll explore later in the programme. 0344 499 1000. Just before we talk to our next guest, John Redwood, very quickly, the voice of doom. This is the mystery voice with a political angle. This is the voice you were trying to identify.
We don't believe that.
Who is that? These are some of the wrong answers. Malcolm Rifkin, no. The legendary Bob from Arbroath, says somebody. Chris Whitty, it is not. John Major, no. Daniel Hannon, no. Fraser Nelson, no. But well done to Darryl in Leicestershire and Andrew in Salisbury, the first two with the correct answer. Here's the voice again.
We don't believe that.
It is. Former Foreign Secretary, probably had a few other positions as well. Douglas Hurd, who was a terribly nice man on the occasions that I met him. Douglas Hurd was the right answer, which means we have a brand new voice next week. Back to Keir Starmer. He's been accused of not really telling the truth over his deal to hand the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. He claimed, as I just mentioned, that this would be about $3.4 billion over 99 years to rent back the key part, which is the military base. The true cost, according to some, could hit $30 billion due to inflation and extra development funding, which apparently was not factored in to that original figure. Let's speak to John Redwood, former Conservative MP, former Cabinet Minister too. John, good afternoon to you. I mean, the plot seems to thicken by the minute on this. It's rather, just unbelievably curious. Hardly covers it really as to what's going on here with Chagos.
No, it doesn't, and you're quite right to point out the difference in the figures. It is going to be around $30 billion in cash paid out over those years, as far as we can see. I don't think the Prime Minister fully understood what a net present value was. I think he probably said to his officials, give me the lowest plausible figure you can, because I want to understate all this.
Yeah.
They did a very clever calculation which pretended that it doesn't hurt as much to pay money in 50 years' time as it does today, so they knocked that down. But the actual cash amounts you're going to be paying are going to be bigger, and so everybody else just thinks that was misleading us all. It's quite obvious that it's going to be more than 10 billion, which is the 100 million a year for the 99 years. And it's going to be considerably more if inflation takes off. And then you've got the other bits he didn't add into the sum. So no, he was trying to pretend this wasn't going to cost us very much. But even worse, he was saying we had to do this because we were about to lose these islands with a court case. Now, he and his lawyers should know that International Court of Justice, which gave an advisory opinion some time ago that it would be nice if we gave the islands to Mauritius, has absolutely no power over this because Britain joined that court with a very clear statement in the original agreement that they couldn't judge any dispute between the UK and a Commonwealth country. Yeah. Well, Mauritius is a Commonwealth country. So the government lawyers should know better, and they should admit that the ICJ can never come to a definitive judgment on us. We have a perfect legal case to say, you don't do that.
Here's the thing, John. I mean, somebody must have said that. This wouldn't have been one sort of duty solicitor that just popped up one day. These would have been very experienced international lawyers that are around the table. At least one of them would have gone, well, hang on a second. They don't hold sway over this. They don't have the capacity to make a legally binding judgment or ruling over this.
No, well, it should have been pointed out. Maybe it was, and maybe they got some other excuse for what they were saying. But it can't be the ICJ, and I pointed all this out and made it publicly available. Yeah. All you had to do was Google the agreement that took us into this court, and it was one of the very first clauses which said that there are some things this court can't do, and anything to do with a Commonwealth country, it can't do. There are also issues over whether it can do defence and nuclear.
Do you think the Conservatives would have come, had they been in power, would have regrettably come to the same conclusion? Because there was a lot of... We spoke to James Cleverly just yesterday. This was on his watch when there were certainly some discussions. I think under Liz Truss, this was being discussed too. Why did no one in those two governments say there's nothing to discuss here?
Well, I think that was the conclusion David Cameron came to, and he was the final Foreign Secretary in that list. And so for the run-up to the election period, David was saying, no, we're not going anywhere near this. And I know that because when he first became Foreign Secretary, I had the advantage of a working lunch with him quite early on. This was one of my big asks, for goodness sake, don't dream of giving the Chagos Islands away. The officials are negotiating over this. He immediately saw the point, and we never heard anything more about the Chagos. So I'm quite sure that David fully understood it. Why did Liz Truss and James Cleverly allow negotiations? Well, they were very strongly urged to do so because they said Mauritius had some points. But the fact that they never said yes to any of the proposals shows that they too didn't think it a good idea to give the islands away with a great big dowry, because there was absolutely no point in doing so.
Well, and give them away to somebody who never owned it in the first place.
Yeah, never owned it in the first place, 1,000 miles away. It's not just down the road. It's the equivalent of the other end of Europe. So there's absolutely no reason. And the Chagosian Islanders that this government's completely ignored didn't want to give it to Mauritius. They had some arguments about the way they were treated in the past by the United Kingdom. But the whole point about asking the Chagosian Islanders to leave the islands when they set up the really big base was that the best possible security for that base is to have no one else anywhere near it. Yeah. So it's just military professionals handling difficult weapons and very fast planes and complicated ships, well away from everybody else, and nobody spying on them, no fishing vessels just offshore and all that kind of thing. And the other thing was it had a huge environmental benefit because there could be no commercial exploitation of those islands and the fishing grounds and all the rest of it. Because it was uniquely for the UK and US navies.
Do you think, or do you sense, and I have no evidence for this, John, but is this sort of Commonwealth guilt that Keir Starmer is suffering from?
Well, I think it's that and lawyeritis, and I think lawyeritis can be very dangerous in a statesman or politician.
Worse than anything.
Because international law is very different from criminal law. Have you broken the criminal law, you are a criminal, you go to prison. That we all understand that, and we want that to be properly enforced. International law is about disputes between states, and it's much better to sort these things out by discussion between states. And it's very difficult to enforce international law against the states. I mean, who was going to enforce something, even if we had?
That debate could have gone on for another 100 years. I mean,
you've got the most powerful navy in the world, the United States, using this as its main base outside the United States of America. Who's going to turn up and say you can't use this anymore?
Why do you think Mr. Trump has sort of signed this off, as it were? There was a sense before he came back into office that he wouldn't, that he would be, incredibly concerned about this, but he seems to have caved in as well.
Yeah, I think it's very disappointing, but my sources are limited in America, but they suggest to me that the Americans don't actually think this is a particularly good idea, but they were humouring the United Kingdom because the United Kingdom wanted to burn up some of its limited political capital on squeezing through this rather dodgy deal. I think that's what happened. And what a tragedy, because we need all the bargaining capital we've got when you've got an administration which is being as tough as it is on allies as well as as enemies around the world.
Indeed. While we're talking about Mr. Trump, he's been vocal again. I mean, his vice president's had a pop at the Prime Minister. Mr. Trump has too, criticising Mr. Starmer's net zero plan, suggesting we should, well, to quote him, drill, baby, drill. He said prioritise the North Sea over renewables.
Well, I think you know my position on this, and I think I got there before President Trump
did.
I very much think we should get our own oil and gas out of the ground rather than importing. The gas is particularly annoying because those who think the only thing that matters is getting CO2 down should recognise that if you import liquid gas, as we now do, instead of having our own gas down a pipe, it's 4 times as much CO2 doing all that, because you've got to get it out of the ground miles away. You've got to liquefy it using a lot of energy. You've got to use a lot of energy putting it in a tanker. You've got to use a lot of energy to get it back to gas again. Whereas if you have your own gas, it's just down the road, down a pipe, and you don't have to keep changing it.
And some of this, you might, again, it comes back to the point I made a little earlier, John. You'd think somebody around the desk over there at Ed Miliband HQ would point this kind of stuff out. I mean, today we've also got the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, telling Miliband that the push to achieve clean power by 2030 and net zero plays into the hands of Beijing.
Yeah, I know. And you and I and others have been going hoarse explaining these things. I've been explaining this gas thing to them for years. I mean, it started under the Conservatives, and now Labour have made it far worse, because we got to the point where the Conservatives said, yes, you know what, we are going to get some of this out. And then Labour come along and say, oh, no, you can't do any of that. For net zero, you've got to close the lot down. And the first thing that happens is the CO2 goes up.
Yeah.
And so it is completely potty what they're doing. And I don't know how you can help get this across, but
yeah, well,
I really do want them to do the right thing. And this is completely the wrong thing. Dear energy and more CO2.
Indeed. Maybe Mr. Miliband missed the science lessons. That's all I can say, because some of this is pretty basic stuff, John, right?
Yeah. And on the spying, I take advice from people who know a lot more about a subject than I do. I don't know very much about spying. But I'm sure it is possible for the Chinese to put things into all these machine controls, all these chips that we're buying from them.
Yeah.
The British government concluded under the previous government that Huawei could be a threat to all our communication systems and made changes to that. Well, we shouldn't let them infiltrate the whole of our energy system. If we're going to buy all these solar panels and put up all these wind turbines, we don't want Chinese controls, which could suddenly flip a switch for us.
Well, that's
and
what
again,
we hear, yes. If there's
we're
a kill
told
switch.
about all these green jobs. All the green jobs are in China. They're not here. We're not making our own solar panels on the scale we need to.
100%.
So what's the point of it?
Yeah, 100%. I don't think we ever will, for that, man. I'm sure there's some companies out there doing their very best to get in on the market, but they ain't about to take on China. Listen, John Redwood, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir, for being with us. He is John Redwood, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Very big opinions, as you heard there, on things like Chagos and the CO2 issue that we discussed latterly there too. You want to comment on that? 0344 499 1000. Rich in London says, afternoon, Ian. Get rid of anti-free speech Starmer and Labour. That's how we restore free speech and end the misery we are currently under. And that does make sense, because he's the Prime Minister now. But I have to go back to that point that half of this stuff, most of this stuff, all the big high-profile stories, you know, when Lawrence Fox and others were getting nicked, and Alan, who we had on with us a little earlier, all of these kind of guys were getting nabbed. This was happening under a Conservative government, right? These were the Tories that were in power when people were going round to houses and arresting folk because they might have... I think the classic one, and was that... I think it might have been the one that involved... Was it Harry that it involved, when they had the flag and the police officer said, you might cause somebody anxiety? I was 8 coppers there, or whatever it was. We're here because we think you've caused somebody anxiety. So how did that ever get the green light down at the police station, where someone said, yeah, I think we need to send a van, a proper transit down. You might have to bring them back as well, stick them in a cell. They've upset somebody over a flag. Wow. Robert's in Hertfordshire. What do you make of this, Robert? Afternoon.
So, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that point. I already had 2 points of my own. I was out in the garden Can I whiz part? I've got 2 points. Can I whiz through them really quick?
Of course you can. Fire away.
I want to see if you're ask if you're a betting man, because I want to bet you a bottle of beer or a bar of chocolate of your choice, as long as it ain't Lindt, stick to Co-op own make. I guarantee you that Starmer will be out by Christmas, and I'll tell you why. The left have been very, very quiet, and they're letting Starmer and his cronies do all the dirty work. And come after the next budget, he'll be gone. Not that it make any difference, because they're just replacing with a...
Will he be gone because he wants to step down, or will he be gone because there'll be such a row in his own party?
Look, everybody have been remarkable how together they've been, but they're not really together. They're going to have an et tu Brutus moment. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
But they don't want to... The left want to make all the difficult decisions.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, this last week, these decisions have been serious. I mean, he's shaping the country now. It was all right at first when he was, getting free sunglasses and having this, but this is getting serious now. And the other point
which bit is getting serious, do you sense, Rob?
It's getting serious because, we're giving away the islands and changing laws. And, now, if Nigel Farage wins the next election, he's going to have his work cut out to put it right, to do some own improvements to the country. I'm just hoping, and I still believe, that they'll dissolve this government within another 2 years. But the other point I want to make, and I'm surprised that no one's tumbled it, is that when he's come out, because I'm a pensioner who lost, me and my wife, we lost our heating allowance this year. Now he's trying to appease people by bringing it back, but he's giving himself the excuse by saying subject to means tested. What a lot of kerfuddle. I'll tell you for why. He don't have to. That's just to give him a little bit more time. So that means that he won't be able to do it this year and probably not next year. Now, and it means he can re-employ all those people that he made redundant, because he's going to need the staff. And the main thing is, you don't need a means test. We've got a thing called a tax return. That's the means test.
It's all there, isn't it? It's all there. So Starmer out by Christmas, ousted by his own party, ousted by the sort of Angela Rayner, Ed Miliband set.
Well, I just hope he goes with him. I think the three amigos will go with him.
You think so?
I just hope so. But they haven't got any. I mean, the rest, they're only replacing with a load of, shampoo.
I reckon he's got another 9 years to go.
9 years?
Yes.
What do you mean?
Well,
explain.
He'll carry on to the end of this election, then he'll win the 2029 election.
Do you really think that?
I don't want that, but I sense that at the moment we've got this divide between the Tories and Reform, and I don't think, even though Reform have done incredible work, I'm not sure, Robert, they can overturn a 170-seat majority. And even with the best will in the world, you forget there's a lot of very hardened Labour areas where, I mean, you could put a chimpanzee in a red dungaree set and people would vote for the chimp. I think to climb or to surmount that is going to be impossible for Reform on their own, unless they get into bed with the Tories.
No, well, I'm a member of the Reform Party, but I mean, I have to cheer myself up straight after the election. I don't trust. He's a narcissist, and I don't trust. The thing about Reform is Nigel Farage, and I don't trust him. He's a snake oil salesman, as far as I'm concerned.
But you do want Reform to win the election?
Well, something's got to happen. I'll tell you what. I'd like UKIP to win the next election.
No, I mean, UKIP are campaigning and saying, look, for those that are concerned, they argue that they're kind of the real deal when it comes to the reformy type areas.
Well, they are, yeah. I've been reading their propaganda lately. Nick, I forget his second name. I've been reading. I mean, they're not going to muck about. And when you think about it, they're only 5 seats behind. They're only 5 seats behind Farage.
Well, but how many council seats are they behind Farage?
No, well, that's right. I think they're not pushing it. But when's he going to put that public? Because at the moment he still owns UKIP, doesn't he?
I don't think so. I don't think he does. I don't know what the status of it is, but I stand to be wrong. I'm pretty sure he doesn't. Otherwise, that might have come up. Listen, Robert, we've hit the clock. Thank you. Great call. Who will buy the beer? 2029, Starmer wins the next election because there is too much apathy and divide on the right. And it could happen. And a lot of the polls at the moment suggest it will happen, that Farage will become the Prime Minister. I'm just not sure that when all those numbers are crunched and people go to the ballot box, that reform on their own is enough to do it. Thoughts on that as well? 0344 499 1000.
Some of the prison officers and staff, they were pretty much a bit shocked, and it kind of like hit home to Lucy as injustice here, because I think, like, especially when the prison officers went, "Oh my God, Lucy, we thought you were sure to be going home now." You know, then she went back an hour, they're all running around all over the place trying to help Lucy out. The officers are, and the inmates, and even the governor. So it shocked all of them.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
The question we began with is how do we save freedom of speech? Is it under threat? Now, there is an argument, some people are quite relaxed, it's not really under threat. Well, that's clearly just, what's the broadcastable word? Nonsense. Bullshine, that's the word. There was a few wobbly knees there just at that moment. That is exactly the word. Look, it's obvious. People have gone to jail for stuff they said on, doing stuff like silly things, or they've had their house raided because they said something that upset somebody. And this is because the letter of the law, the 1986 Act that deals with all of this palaver, is now being applied to social media. The Public Order Act back then, and Lucy Connolly was jailed under the Section 19 of that, the incitement clause. It's not fit for purpose in the common age, because you've suddenly got individual. This was designed when political parties or protest groups or newspapers or publishers were putting stuff out there to make sure that we stopped and checked inflammatory language and the like. I mean, the Public Order Act covers loads of things, but this section, it wasn't designed because Lucy or Bob decided to get a bit grumpy and a bit offensive on Twitter. And the more you think about it, I know people on the hard left, they can't get their head around this argument. You have to get your head around this argument. You really do, because it's crucial to democracy. Freedom of speech is absolutely central to this whole discussion. 0344 499 1000. Let's get a call. We mentioned Doctor Who as well earlier. That's another thing that's disappearing under Keir Starmer. He can't keep hold of anything. Philippa in Poole, what's happening, Philippa?
Hi, Ian. Lovely to talk to you.
You too.
I'm just really fed up with all this wokeism that's everywhere. In Doctor Who, in advertising,
blockbusters,
absolutely everything. I'm just sick to death of it.
Even Love Thy Neighbour's gone woke. I mean, that's how bad it is.
Because television doesn't reflect real life anymore. It doesn't reflect real life in this country.
Yeah.
You know, when you've got drama television, history television showing Anne Boleyn as black, it's just like what.
Oh, come on! She was definitely black. And I can't believe you've fallen for the old white Anne Boleyn line, haven't you? Your history teachers, Philippa, should be in jail, frankly.
Darling, I am a history teacher. I am a historian.
Oh, there you go. Well, you see, whoever taught you at university, they should be in jail. They should be in The Hague at the moment.
I just think it's all gone absolutely crazy.
It is. I mean, it's kind of barking mad, isn't it? If you was it EastEnders a few years ago that got told off? I don't think, not legally. I think they got told off because they had an over-representation of what you would call diversity in one of their episodes. It's like, I don't think there was any white people in it at all for a couple of episodes. And someone said, look, we know the East End is, it's always been diverse for lots of reasons, very Jewish at one point, that all went to North London, in certain areas very Bangladeshi, etc. But there are still quite a lot of white people live there. They didn't have any, apparently, in a couple of episodes. So I think TV, they're all trying to showcase their virtuous credentials, aren't they?
They are, and I'm also disabled myself with cerebral palsy, and I also get sick to death that disabled people aren't represented in the right way. We're either represented as these para-Olympians, these superhumans, or we're represented as victims, and we need charity, and we need.
You've got that wrong. You've got that wrong as well, Philippa. I'm afraid we don't want to see any disabled people on television, do we? I mean, let's be brutally honest about it. I mean, goodness me, crutches on TV at family viewing time.
I know.
What sort of world have we arrived in?
The thing is, unless something affects a person, they don't care about it as a topic.
It's interesting. I think the disability issue, genuinely, and all sort of slightly bad jokes apart, is more interesting because I suppose that there is. I mean, if you can present or act, then it wouldn't matter. To deliberately put somebody in a role, I mean, if you had Anne Boleyn, I'm not trying to be smart by saying this, but back to Anne Boleyn, that not only was she a black woman, but she was also a quadruple amputee, then we really would be in strange territory, wouldn't we?
We would. It was called colourblind casting, basically, and Bridgerton was exactly the same. Other dramas were exactly the same. Like why? Why just represent life as it actually was or is? That's all that viewers are asking.
Well, you also forget that, this idea of diversity, if you take, and you're looking at different ethnic groups, if you take the black group compared to the white group, the largest percentage of the black population in this country live in London. There's areas and towns around the country, despite what we see on TV, that don't have anybody of any other colour than white living there. They must turn on the telly and think, where is this place?
It was a bit like that in Poole for quite some time, but we're now catching up with the rest of the country.
Well, that's good. There's progress eventually in Poole. But that's the funny thing, the idea that the only way you measure progress, that is as if there's something intrinsically wrong with you or your company or your institution because you don't have X amount of these people, X amount of those people, X amount of this gender, X amount of that sexuality, X amount of that religion. That is the way you are meant to kind of construct or build a community or a society or a company. It's just for the birds. There's no... it doesn't make any sense.
Going back to EastEnders, do you know what I would love to see? I would love to see them bringing in a family of illegal migrants coming in, or a group of young men who came over illegally on boats, and them putting them up in one of the houses in the square and turfing out the residents.
Wow, wouldn't that be something? Yeah, I wonder if they're...
see the reaction.
Nipping into the old Vic for a quick shifty before they, go off to the hotel in the square that's just been built to house them. I love it. There's so much on this one. Philippa, you've been great. Thank you very much indeed for that. 0344 499 1000. Colin says, Colin in Chester, so we have given up our sovereignty of the Chagos Islands. I wonder what the King thinks of Starmer handing it over. What next? Do we sell Canada to the Americans to get us out of a financial mess? Yeah, I think the Canadians would say, well, you don't own us in the first place. Johanna in Salisbury says, do you think we could persuade Trump that the UK could be the American 51st state? Trump might be nuts, but I prefer nuts than a rich Marxist ideologist that's destroying our country. A death by 1,000 cuts. There it is. Coming up, we talk crime. CrimeCon, of course, is happening very, very soon. Each week we've been focusing on that. The crime of spiking. I don't think many people had even heard about drink spiking until relatively recently. It is a problem. It's gone on for years. It went unchecked. It almost went unacknowledged, like it was. What do you mean someone spiked your drink? Well, I didn't. I woke up collapsed in an alley, and I only had one baby sham. That's not normal. I make light of that side of it. This is sinister and has, and can have and has had fatal results. We'll talk more on that with a real expert in this field coming next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 25 to 4. Peter Cargwell will be here at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Always got a big, busy show. Today, no different. He'll pop in between now and then to give us the heads up on what's happening on Drive. Now it's time to talk crime. Over the coming weeks, we're delving into the minds of criminals and those who chase them. This is leading up, of course, to the world's #1 true crime event, CrimeCon, which returns to London on June the 7th and June the 8th. This is absolutely huge. If you can get along to it, get along to it. From the psychology of offenders to forensic breakthroughs and the fight against wrongful convictions, we'll be bringing you insights from some of the biggest names in true crime. And today, we're talking about an area that, frankly, really does, and until I realised we were going to talk about this today, I thought, this just doesn't get the airtime it should do. It's better than it was, but ain't anywhere near where it should be. And this is spiking. We're going to speak now to a campaigner who spent 20 years fighting drink spiking and led the push to make it a specific offence, with the Prime Minister now promising new laws to help more victims come forward. Dawn Dines is the CEO of Stamp Out Spiking. Dawn, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, Ian Collins. Thank you ever so much for having us on. And do you know what? That's music to my ears. You just explaining what hugely underreported crimes these are. And it's, you know, something that we all need to be working collaboratively to change that narrative.
One of the things I've never understood about, I mean, there's lots of things I don't understand why anybody would want to spike somebody's drink, but given that, you know, we're sometimes told by some offenders that they thought they were having a joke. There was no desire to carry out any horrendous act on somebody. They thought it was, they got some stuff from someone, said, "Oh, put it in Bill's drink or Miranda's drink and, you know, watch them go all floppy and a bit weird. It'll be hilarious and we can film it and put it on, you know, our story and stuff." Now, that might be fine, but you might think, if you're the perpetrator, I could actually kill somebody here. I don't know what I've been given to put in a drink. That's the bit that has always struck me as really quite sinister, that people have not taken what could be a lethal crime from a joke to a lethal crime. We'll come on to the fact that it's mostly not a joke in a second. But, you know, those that do this stand, as the offender, are taking one heck of a risk.
They're taking a massive risk. At the end of the day, we've got people on our streets that are going around putting mind-rendering drugs into people's system without their consent or knowledge, and they're basically like chemists, and they're treating people, not just across the UK, but across, it's a global issue. And people are basically like guinea pigs, aren't they? They're just testing out these drugs to see how they can take advantage of them, how they're going to make them vulnerable, what the drugs are going to do to them. And when people say to me, "Oh, maybe it's just a prank," you know, I'm like, are you really going to make somebody be violently sick, wet themselves, go in and out of consciousness as a joke? I don't believe it's a prank. I believe that probably those people couldn't take you away from your crowd or your friends. And that's why we don't have any other crimes that are taking place. And, you know, I've got to thank CrimeCon, because when I was there last year, I met with, you know, Nancy and David Jones, who arranges it all. And I was lucky enough to go on a podcast with the wonderful senior detective, Jackie Moulton. And it was regarding a case of Charles Sabrage. And he's an absolute monster who spiked and murdered kids around the globe and is currently sitting as a free man over in France. And you know, when I went to CrimeCon, I was like, what is this? A brilliant group of people all trying to suss out what they can do to help other people, how, you know, like you say, injustice to people, and really get into the true heart of what's going on. And obviously, we're lucky enough to make the finals at the True Crime Awards in June. So very excited about that.
And of course, you know, we mentioned about mates thinking they're having jokes with other mates, whether that victim is male or female. But on the real side of this, the more serious side, I would take a guess here, Dawn, that most victims are female, most perpetrators are male. There are other reasons why they might want to spike a drink, and invariably those reasons involve some kind of assault.
Yeah, well, do you know what? That's something we don't really know, I'm afraid, because the data doesn't show it. And I'm sat here with equal amount of male and female victims. The most prolific male rapist in history was the Sanaga case up in Manchester about 5 years ago, where he raped over 200 men, and hardly any of those men came forward. So we've done a national campaign, like, if only it was this easy to see a spiked drink. And we had like 700% uptake on our website. We got hold of millions of people all across the UK. And it's great that now, you know, we're opening those floodgates for people to come forward. And if anybody's been affected by these crimes, if they don't feel that they can go and report to the police, please, you know, contact us at Stamp Out Spiking. I can see you've got some of the visuals there. It was quite sinister. This campaign. We've got a new campaign coming out this year, but do you know what? When people said to me, oh, that give me the EBGBs looking at your campaign, I'm like, good, because it's an evil crime, and it's something that currently is just going around the country, and we, you know, perpetrators have been getting away with these disgusting crimes for decades, and now that, you know, like you've said, we don't get enough airtime, so thank you so much for given us this opportunity to share how these national campaigns can help men and women. We got to take that power back. These perpetrators cannot be going out in our nighttime, daytime economy, house parties, cricket matches, football matches, funerals even. You know, we hear so many different testimonials. So that's why we believe accredited training needs to go across the country.
Who the heck spikes someone's drink at a funeral, for goodness sake? But, you know, there's naught queerer than folk, as they say. You've been a victim yourself of this as well, Dawn, as I understand, some years ago.
I have. Like, somebody tried to spike me back in 1989, and I caught them in the act. His hand was hovering over my drink, and I came back to the table, and it moved really quickly, and all the hairs on the back of my neck went up. I thought, he's done something to my drink, and do you know what? I was going to do like one of the crime novels, go out and swap the drinks like a James Bond thing. But I didn't. I jumped out of a little window and ran for my life. And that guy had been bothering me for months to go out on a date with him. And he never came back and said to me, why would you leave me there? So my suspicions were confirmed. And then... Oh,
so you were on a date with this guy when this happened?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, I was out on a date. So that's another thing that, you know, first of all, let's get this law changed. We've got 5 cross-political parties who all agree that spiking needs to be updated. The King has said that he's going to have violence against women and girls. We think that it should be men and boys as well, especially on the spiking agenda. But as soon as that has happened, then we need to be looking at what are the government going to be doing? What money are they going to be putting in so we can train the hospitality, people who work on public transport, you know, taxi drivers. These are all people that need to know what people look like, what they act like when they've been spiked, so that we can intercept these perpetrators when they're doing these crimes.
Indeed. Is it one type of drug that people use when they're spiking? Are there many? What is it usually that someone is trying to put into somebody's drink, and what does it do to them?
This is the other grey area, really, Ian, because we got people out there putting testing kits around the country. They only test for a few drugs used. We know from the Met Police that they found 100 different type of drugs that are used in spiking incidents. And when people say to me, you know, where are people getting these disgusting drugs? I'm like, well, from the doctors, some of them. You know, we've got all the benzodiazepam family that can be used, let alone ketamine and some of these synthetic drugs now. So the whole point is for us to recommend for people to cover their drinks. Don't leave your drinks unattended. Keep your eye out on everybody, not just yourself and your friends. If you see something untoward happening to somebody's drink, if somebody's sharing a vape, because that's the next thing now that are being spiked, You know, because people are going, oh, do you want to try my blueberry vape? And boom, they've got you, because they can easily put something on the mouthpiece. So
I've never even thought about that.
Yeah, food, chewing gum, the list is endless, Ian, it really is. So we just believe that the government need to put their hand in their pocket. They need to fund some of this training that is urgently needed, because we've got an epidemic going around the country. Men and women are being taken advantage of, and we're not gaining any sort of convictions.
And do you sense that most of it is because somebody wants to carry out an assault on someone, or do you think it is friends who are, you know, having a laugh, or a stranger that wants to watch from afar as your legs turn into rubber? Or what is the, as best you can, Dawn, because it's, as you say, it's a confusing picture. What do you think is the usual reasoning for people spiking?
Well, we've just done a victim's journey, and that survey is still running, and it's in conjunction with Cardiff University, and we're going to be releasing that data later this year. And we have found out that quite a few spikings are for sexual assault. Some of them are for robbery, and that is on the increase. We've also got, you know, really sinister human trafficking, corporate espionage. There's a plethora of reasons why people do these disgusting crimes, and mainly it's to make that person vulnerable. You know, when these date rape drugs get put into your system, you're left, you can't put up a fight, you become compliant, and then you're left with no memory. So it speaks for itself. Some perverse things that people want to do to you, mainly things that you would never let another person do to you.
100%. You are at CrimeCon in June. Tell us a little bit more about that for the uninitiated, Dawn.
So CrimeCon is a conference that has been going on for a few years. I was only there for the first time last year. Like I said, I'd done a podcast with Jackie Moulton talking about Charles Sabrage, that dreadful, the serpent they call him, and he got away with these crimes for years. So this year I'm going to be there doing a podcast and a guest speaker slot. We're also going to be at the True Crime Awards, which are on the 5th of June. So if anybody would love to come along, it would be fantastic to meet up with you. If anybody likes what we're doing, please check out our charity. We don't get any core funding. If you'd like to donate and try and help us on our plight to educate, campaign, get the law updated, and then we can get the real work done. We can start training people so that they know all what I know, and they can start to intercept these perpetrators.
Indeed. Listen, Dawn, good luck with it all. Keep up the campaign. I hope the Prime Minister's ears are burning as we discuss this. And I know you've got cross-party support as well, which is great. That's Dawn Dines, who's the CEO of Stamp Out Spiking. And if this area, certainly like me, really fascinates you, I mean, the whole area, the genre of crime, has always had that very sort of almost beyond intrigue. It's that sort of fallibility of humans in all sorts of ways. You might like to know that our friends at CrimeCon are actually offering Talk listeners a massive discount on weekend and one-day tickets to CrimeCon in London. The ultimate true crime event takes place on the 7th and the 8th of June. It's over 40% saving on the ticket, by the way. If you go to crimecon.co.uk, use the code TalkTV is the best way to do it. Crimecon.co.uk, use the special code TalkTV, all one word, and hopefully we'll see you there. This is Talk.
every single time these people get together in a room, they get near power and they just implode. And it's going to happen, and his name is Rupert Lowe. Rupert Lowe is going to tear down reform, and he's going to do it not because he doesn't care about reform. He's going to do it because of the way he was treated.
Let's live in the real world. Rupert Lowe's going to join the Conservative Party, isn't he?
I don't know.
He is, though, isn't he?
I think they probably will take him.
Let's be honest. All of these rumours, that Rupert Lowe was conspiring with the Conservative Party, they're all going to be proved to be true.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is an interesting one. I'd never really thought about this, but David says, I worked as a paramedic for 30 years, and the most common thing to spike a drink with is actually more alcohol. It's not always by predatory males, but also by friends who think they're not getting into the spirit of the night out. Alcohol affects you in different ways and at different times. They will often say things like, she can drink a lot more than this. Someone must have spiked her drink. But as I say, an infection, no blood, stress, no food, stress can all affect the way you react to alcohol. I think everybody's been there when it's go on, have another one, or they've half tipped their drink into somebody else's drink. Not even considered to be spiking in that sense, but I guess if over the course of an evening someone ends up drinking twice the amount, it's a mate's joke almost. Yeah, that's spiking. Let's get back to freedom of speech. Danny is down in London. Danny, what have you got for us?
Good afternoon. Yeah, I just heard about the freedom of speech. Yeah. The lady that got put in prison for 31 months for what she tweeted, that was wrong, and we all know it was wrong, and she's, more or less apologised for it. But I went to Piccadilly or Trafalgar Square with my son a few weeks ago, and I heard those Palestinian marches. They were banging drums, and my son was so scared. And obviously, you know what they sing, from the river to the sea, and we all know what that means. Well, surely that is worse than what she done. Surely it is.
Well, it's en masse, and there's no doubt about it. I know that the defence of the river to the sea seems to be, well, they seem to say it doesn't mean that. It's got loads of meanings, but we know what it means.
But surely Starmer should ban that. Surely he should ban it, because we know what they mean. Surely. I don't understand it.
Well, I think the criminal justice system goes to the path of least resistance almost. So it's very easy to nab somebody on social media. If they start going hands en masse at a Palestinian riot, they're going to be accused of racism. They're going to be accused of Islamophobia. They'll probably start a bigger riot. And that's my only interpretation of why we've seen such little action. You know, we have people carrying swastikas, for God's sake, Danny.
But the thing is, certain people, who I'm not going to say, seem to be protective of the law. They do. It's 100% that is true. It is true.
Yeah.
It is. If I went past a mosque and started shouting things, blah, 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 I would be arrested, and rightly so. Now, what about, I don't know, it was a few months ago, they went in a Jewish community in cars saying, we're going to rape your daughters in loudspeakers.
Absolutely. Now, if that happened, I can't remember, was it about 7-8 years ago or something? I remember it happening, and it was just absolutely awful.
Yeah. Now, if I went past a mosque doing that in my car, they'd have my registration on the CCTV and I'd be arrested.
Well, you'd think so.
100% rightly so. So why do they get away with it? Why?
Yeah.
It's wrong. It's so wrong. Honestly, it's so wrong in this country what's happening. It's terrible.
It's terrible. Danny, it's a powerful point to finish on. Thank you for that. Final couple here. Joanne says, why do you blame Bob from Arbroath for everything? I told you before, I actually know a Bob from Arbroath. I know for a fact. He loves this every time you mention him. But Just Me says, I love how you always refer to social media trolls as Bob in Arbroath or some other typical British Christian name, but never use Mohammed from Luton or Zia from Bradford. Is it only white Brits that use social media, or are you walking on eggshells? I use Bob from Arbroath and have done for about 10 years. For everything. It's nothing to do with social media. It could be anything. You know, when I say if you wake up in the morning, Bob in Arbroath isn't necessarily thinking about what is happening in the world of XYZ. He's more concerned about the cost of living. Bob in Arbroath has always been... It wasn't always Bob in Arbroath, though. There was somebody else, because it used to be the person on the Clapham omnibus. That's how it was always defined, meaning the average Brit, basically. And Bob in Arbroath, and I think I picked Arbroath because I thought if I say Bob in London, it might sound too London-centric. So we settled on Bob in Arbroath about a decade ago. But yes, just me, just so you know, he is applied to all manner of scenarios and stories, not just social media. In fact, I don't think Bob in Arbroath would be Mardy on social media. I think Bob in Arbroath would be a fairly neutral poster. Dodge Pop McDougall, however, there's another one. So now there's a Scottish connotation with McDougall, isn't there? So, you know, am I in danger now of being sort of anti-Scottish in some kind of way? I hope not, given my own family connections. Lots going on at this end, and thank you for the great calls we've had over the last few hours. As ever, you've been amazing, and thank you. We're off for the bank holiday weekend, but back on Tuesday. That said, David Ball, the good doctor, is here on Monday at 1 o'clock. But Adam, our producer, is actually still going to be here. There is no rest for Adam, unfortunately, but he will go out tonight and get smashed, so he doesn't care. What he might do, might not do, I don't know. Peter Cardwell is here. And Manu, you don't drink, do you, Peter?
I don't. There are quite a lot of people who'd like to see me smashed, though.
Yes, true. Did you ever drink?
Yeah, I was a big drinker until about 7 years ago. That was the problem. That's why I stopped drinking.
You thought,
I stopped
I'm
drinking.
liking this too much.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it wasn't
I know
so
a
good.
lot of people who didn't become... They're never alcoholics. They just suddenly checked themselves one day and thought, I'm doing this too much.
That was basically me.
Yeah.
That was basically me, yeah. Give it up for a month on the advice of a friend of mine who's a psychiatrist. He said, give it up for a month, no issue, absolutely fine. Did that for a month, went back on for about 10 days, and then just thought, nah, won't do this anymore. Best decision I've ever made.
Don't regret it, don't miss it.
Don't miss it, don't regret it, have exactly the same social life, go to the pub as often as I did previously, have, leave maybe a little bit earlier when people start to babble a little bit, but,
that's true.
It's everything.
The only problem with that is you are terrible company when we're in the pub.
I'm terrible company anyway, Ian, so, you're used to it by now.
You're way too sensible on those staff nights out. It's like, do we want a lift home? Cardwell's the man with the car keys.
Designated driver.
There it is, every time. What's happening after 4, Peter?
Well, lots. I mean, Trump has attacked Starmer's net zero plans.
Yeah,
it's fascinating. I think we need to ask the question about why we pay so much for energy in this country. 3 times as much for domestic energy as in America. It's even more when it comes to commercial energy as well. We'll look into the Chagos deal. Netanyahu, interestingly, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he's been saying recently, literally in the last few minutes, that Israel needs to put more aid into Gaza. We'll talk about that, but also the fact that Netanyahu has launched a big broadside against Macron, Carney in Canada, and specifically Starmer as